Hey guys, it's Christina. This is Vox and Guest, and I am joined by a dapper gentleman here today. Say hello, Jack. Introduce yourself to the class.
Hello, Jack. No, my name is Jack Phantom. I'm presently just outside of Pensacola, Florida, and I'm calling in to you today.
Okay, yeah, he is. He's calling in on the video, and we've got him here. Jack Phantom in the Exquisite Corpse Cabaret, to be specific. And I am happy to have Jack on the show because Jack is our first, that I can remember, jazz musician that we've had. So I think we're going to have a lot to talk about there. But Jack, you may or may not be aware, as someone who I think has seen the show, that I do like to begin every episode with a hard-hitting question. And I'm going in a slightly different direction with you because I'm actually just really curious what your answer to this would be. So, are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. So, would you rather, if you could just get some sort of life upgrade, be better at expressing yourself or better at understanding other people?
Well, I think understanding other people for sure.
Okay, tell me why.
The more you understand other people, the better it is that you can empathize with them, and the more you can help them, and the more you can relate to them.
Mm.
The oldest form of entertainment and the oldest anything that human beings have ever done is storytelling or
Yeah.
interacting with each other.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to read what the other person is thinking, how the other person is feeling, then you're just transmitting. There's no
Mm.
relationship. There's
Mm.
no give and take, and there's no bond. So, could you always improve that? Absolutely. Would I be looking to? Definitely.
Mm. Very good answer. Very cool. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think empathy is at the root of all connection. I think connection is at the root of all relationships. So I'm right there with you. I think it's some people I know would probably vote for expressing themselves better because I think they probably think they understand more than they can convey. But I generally tend to think that people would do better to listen more and talk less, which is ironic coming from me because I never shut up. But there you have it. It's the ideal version of things. So, okay, thank you for the excellent and thoughtful answer. I appreciate that. Usually I do something a little jokier, but I don't know, maybe it's the suit. I felt like I had to throw you
Jokey
something a
is
little
fine.
more erudite too.
I mean,
Well, we can get into your favorite kind of,
okay.
cheese or whatever later. But okay, so before we get into what you're doing now, why don't you take me back to how you got into music in the first place? Because you have a fascinating backstory. So, right, English family, you grew up in Canada,
Yes.
and had an errant youth in punk and speed metal and all of this, right? And now we're in jazz. So talk me through how old were you when first got into music in general? What'd you do before you picked up the sax? All that good stuff.
Sure. Well, at around the age of 12 or so, I was given a guitar. Um, I'm neurodivergent and I find it difficult to interact with people. So
Same.
needed something to do. And my
Mm.
parents were like, here's a guitar. It's cheap. Go for it. So I started playing that.
Acoustic,
Our hometown,
electric.
oh, it was an electric.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, they wanted me to, my mother's desire was to have a big man on campus, captain of the football team, popular with all the girls, and I've been a lifelong disappointment to her. Let's put it that way.
That that
But
that that makes you good people in my book because I have no patience for the big man on campus. It's usually the small mind. But yeah, all right, I hear you. Okay, so
well, the guy who
yeah.
is that way, the guy who is that way on our in our high school is actually a decent kind of person, and
Oh, okay.
really, yeah, no, he was one of the rare
Canada.
examples where it didn't turn him into a bully or anything. He's a really nice guy.
That's
But
lovely,
to
actually, to know that exists, that's possible. Okay, I do think it's because it was Canada, but go ahead, go ahead.
So to carry on with the question, so
Mhm.
I went to an arts high school, and one of the interesting things that happened in our hometown was one. I'm remembering the essence of the story because we're going back over 35 years here. But the gist is, to make a very very long story short, a kid in our town was given some bar mitzvah money to just start a business. They were like, "Look, just start something. It's going to fail. do something you enjoy. Don't care
Okay.
about doing something that will make money. Just do something that will fail.
Okay.
And the experience will, having to negotiate a lease, so he decided, and his whole thing, and I'm going to try and short circuit this as much as
No,
possible. He
it's
opened a
good. This is what I'm asking. I'm interested. So go ahead.
so it was a non-alcoholic dance club,
Okay.
because the idea is there's only so many school dances you can go to per year. And if you
Right.
got a teenage girlfriend, can't take her to a bar,
Right.
there's only so many movies that are playing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
Oh,
basically
cool.
he used the money to buy a back line and rent a place that was right downtown, back when the downtown was sort of run down, and it was sort of where you bought dope, and there were prostitutes up and down the road. And
Okay.
they're like, you're gonna need to sign a 5-year lease. We want to try to get people in here as much as possible.
Oh man.
So the guy kind of looked at his dad. He's like, no, we'll front you the money. No, that's fine. We'll figure it out later. So
Holy shit.
he got a
Okay.
drinks machine and a small PA and set that up. And two things happened. The first was some property developers built the largest mall. And keep in mind, this is the 80s, so malls were huge.
Oh yeah.
About half a block away.
Oh.
The city routed every bus going through the town into that shopping center. And the other thing that happened was every young person that lived more than a mile away from the school, well, rather than pay for school buses, they just give them a bus pass. So now, no matter where you lived, if you lived in the urban area or if you lived in the suburbs, you could get there within 15 minutes
Okay.
free.
Wow. Okay.
So
So-
that real estate was really, really desirable, and just about everybody went there. So it became very popular.
Oh, that's awesome. So
And,
it did not
yeah.
fail. Okay. Did not fail at all.
And there's a local kid in my neck of the woods, Lee, I think his name was. And he basically mowed lawns like all summer. And then he just took the money, and rather than buy something, he reached out to a punk band that he wanted to hear and said, look, I've got some money. How much would you charge to play my hometown? Because I really want to hear you play, right? And the town I was in Ottawa is halfway between Montreal and Toronto.
Right.
So they would have pretty much had to stop there anyway, because it's literally half the distance between the two. It's
Right.
probably about an 8-9 hour drive.
Okay.
So they kind of were like, yeah, we'll do it for half the amount and just get us a place to stay. And it's like, well, do you mind, bedding down at my place? My mom will feed you and wash your clothes and everything. And they're like, yep, absolutely.
Wow.
So
Okay.
they came, they did the gig, they left. And basically Lee had reached out to this guy with his club and said, do you mind if I put on a concert here? And he's like, if you pay me like the $60 that I'd normally make or whatever in the day, I don't care. And in essence, we had this punk band show up and everybody showed up for it. And Lee ended up with more money than he started out with. So he started writing to other bands.
Yeah.
And
Hell yeah.
we became known on the circuit. It was like, if these kids reach out to you, go do it, because first
Tons
it's
of
your
people
market.
will show up. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They don't stiff you on your fee. They'll pay you cash up front, and there'll be like a small army of young people like roadieing your stuff in and out for you.
Holy
Packed
crap.
lunch, you can call home. Yeah, so for a touring band, this was huge, right?
Yeah, they must
And
have
so-
loved it. Yeah.
So if you had a teenage band, right, they were always looking for opening bands for these particular acts. So I either carried instruments for or opened for. I think the only two punk bands we didn't end up getting there were the Circle Jerks went to Carleton University.
Okay.
I never saw the Exploited. I never saw Black Flag or Henry Rollins. But
Okay.
7 Seconds I remember. Dayglow Abortions I remember. I think Charge GBH showed up. Chaos UK showed up.
Yeah,
basically
these are
my
names
entire.
even I know. I don't listen to punk
Well,
music, and even I know. Yeah,
Exactly. And I was like 4 or 5 feet away from them. I carried a lot of their gear and
Wow.
heard their real names.
And
got
you
their
were
signatures.
14, 15, 16 when this was going on?
Yeah. So basically, my really crappy punk band would come play a couple of songs, and then they get off the stage, and we get off the stage, and then
Right.
like this amazing band would come on. But I get to meet them, and I
That's
took notes about
fantastic.
what who used what. So
Yeah.
so it was a lot of fun. I got a lot of experience performing. I got a lot of experience doing things like organizing bands, putting on posters.
What a
And also
great
seeing that I
story,
really-
Jack. That's a great who has a childhood like that? You became basically a club promoter and concert
no.
organizer.
No. But those guys actually did end up becoming concert promoters. And the guy that had that nightclub, actually, I think he owns one or two like of the nightclubs in Ottawa. I mean, he actually really did go
He
into that as a
parlayed it
business.
into okay.
Yeah, he parlayed that to a complete career.
That's fantastic.
So But the other thing I learned from that is I really didn't want to live in a van. Like I saw how these guys actually
Yeah,
lived, and I was
yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah, not for me. So I did want to perform. I wanted to do music, but I never wanted to live the life of a touring punk musician.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was great. I got to see that firsthand. Said, nope, different life path, and that was it. But I did get to meet these guys and have quite a bit of fun as a teenager, and some great memories.
That is so cool. No, I mean that's I mean, and especially coming from, it's not like your family was going to Ramones concerts. Like you had, it sounds like more of a, symphony kind of National Arts Center, family that was, and so you're doing this over
Right.
here and have this pretty successful thing going. And then, your family's in another place. So foot in both worlds. So,
Sure.
but
Well,
then,
they would
yeah.
show up. Yeah.
Oh,
Well, they
that's
would
cool.
show up and say,
Okay.
like, "Where's the adult organizing this?" I was like, "No, it's just."
It's
And so
us.
years later, I had a jazz musician say, "You put out an album." Like, I mean, I know people who've been in this 25 years who don't think they're up to it, and I'm like, we just did it. We just
Yeah.
DIY'd it. We
Yeah.
just wrote to them. They're like, "Hey, can we figure some way that doesn't involve a ton of cash for you to come out here?" And they're like, "Okay, well, we'll do it for less money if we can also get this quid pro quo." And
Mm,
we learned that art of negotiation, that if you do it yourself
yeah.
and you make it equitable, you make it win-win for both sides, you can
Right.
get so much done. That's what I
Yeah.
really carried from those years.
But you're right though, because a lot of people, I mean, just as somebody who's played in bars and whatever, you're always looking for, am I going to get screwed on the door? Am I going to get screwed on, the drinks? Am I going to get screwed on what,
Yep.
and not because, one is looking to get screwed, but because that's a lot of times what happens. You go, you're an afterthought, you get double booked, you get bumped, you get whatever. So to have a group of kids doing this for the love of music and then making it fair and fun and comfortable and and familial, because as you said, if you're living out of the back of a van, and I'm thinking of Crimson Asphalt, sitting in their van talking to me, like, you go and you're staying at somebody's house, their mom cooks them dinner, like right
Sure.
there. That's going to be the
Well, the
best
story she
meal they're
could
going
tell,
to get.
right?
Oh, I
Yeah.
bet. Yeah. No, so that's tremendous. And you're exactly right. You learned, and I get the sense it isn't something you would have necessarily not landed on in another idiom, but that, doing the right thing and being a good person and being honest works out. I mean,
Right.
it doesn't always, unfortunately, but it's still the better way to go. So, okay. So you, at that point, then, when did the film and TV element come in before you switched gears again?
So I initially wanted to be an actor at first. I was in
Okay.
several acting troupes in various high schools. That's why I ended up in the arts high school.
Right.
But no, I went to basically university for what was listed in the brochure as a graphic design program, but turned out to be a bigger communications program with a
Okay.
TV studio and film. So you ended up studying film, you ended up studying television, audio production.
Yeah.
And even though I never got the chance to do anything with it remotely professionally, it set me going forward. But I got a good grounding in how to basically run and operate a TV studio. And even though it was a small student one, you had to produce television, you had to produce small films
Yeah.
in order to pass the course. So
Okay.
that, and again, you learn the skills there of, don't mess up the equipment, show up on time for studio time when you have it booked,
That's
script
right.
ready to go, actors rehearsed. You don't mess around and waste anyone's time.
That's it. And time and money and all of that. So, I mean,
Right.
by the time you finished college,
Mhm.
you had an education in, organizing bands and recruiting them and setting up this, being part of setting up this mecca for musicians. And then also how to run a small TV studio, how to do film, how to do TV. I mean, again, obviously it's a bit of a gloss in a broader communications degree, but that's
I think
a lot.
you're also I think you're imputing more to me. I didn't actually run any of these things. I was just present in the room. Yes, I did study there, but the club was really run by other people, but I got
Okay,
exposed to
gotcha.
how it works. Like I just want
Okay.
to make sure nobody watching this
Oh
goes,
no,
is he
I
taking
understand.
credit for the place?
No,
Like, no,
that's
no.
me. That's me. Jack's not the one saying it. I'm the one giving credit where it apparently is not entirely due. But still, I mean, it's all of that is a part of making something work, And so, for you to have gotten this level of education by your early 20s is pretty astounding. And so then, though, what, we're in the big .com boom, and you decided you were
Right.
going to switch gears and go into IT. How did that?
Well, okay, so how that happened was I obviously wanted to do something with my education, and there's no film, television, anything like that at the time in Canada.
Okay.
There is now in Toronto and there is now in Nova Scotia, but not at the time.
Okay.
And so I basically was sitting there going, well, I got this degree and I don't know what to do with it. So I wanted to try my hand. They were doing multimedia at the time. There was before the internet, a lot of people were producing like educational CD-ROMs with that you could click on, and it was all done in Macromedia and stuff like that. So I applied to a couple of those places, and they're like, look, I could throw a stick and hit 25 people who do video, who do movies. The one thing I can't find is a programmer. If you go if you go figure out how to write the programming to make this work, I'll hire you on the spot.
Okay.
So while I was in school for that place folded, but I came out the other side now with, a student loan for software development going, now what do I do?
Yeah.
So I moved to the United States, and that was just, spent time just going from place to place to place on visas legally, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one place I went to said, hey, we want to sponsor you for citizenship. And then that happened. So now I'm here as a US citizen, totally above board, but I got to travel. I think Boston, Seattle, Memphis. I lived in Connecticut.
Okay, you really ping-ponged all over the country then. Okay.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now the acting thing, just you kind of abandoned that because did it not click with you, or just, how difficult the business is to try and break into, or a little both, or?
So, yeah, no, the acting thing is weird because I have this very odd voice, and I also have to wear glasses.
Okay.
I'm not only just blind as a bat without them, but one of my eyes crosses furiously into my nose.
Oh, okay,
so
sure.
I'd go to auditions and they'd be like, well, one, you have no personal charisma. And second of all, the glasses, can you lose the glasses? And I'd say, no, I can't. And they'd be like, okay, next. I did end up meeting.
Rude.
Oh, no. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. It's like, this is what you want. And if you're
but
not
you
that,
would at
go
least
away.
Want them to be accurate. I'm going to quibble with that no personal charisma bit, but okay, fine. They don't like amblyopia. I get it. Fine. So, okay. So you kind of read the room and said, not worth it. This is not going to pan out the way I want it to. Okay.
There's very few calls for this as a teenager or as a young adult in television. Now, some of the people I did this with for a while went on to some amazing things. Tom Green went on to turn his little DIY TV show.
Where are you, Mom? Mom, I'm lost.
He lived like 3 streets over from me. I wasn't friends with him. I just saw him in the neighborhood, but he ended up going off and turning that into an MTV thing.
Oh yeah.
Another one of the extras for a show I did You Can't Do That on Television was done in Ottawa.
Yeah.
And they tried to do a teen soap opera show. I didn't win that audition, but I was asked to come as an extra. And one of the other extras there was a young woman by the name of Sandra Oh, who went on to do Grey's Anatomy.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So I've, and I'm sure somebody's going to bring up at some point, I've shared a picture of myself with Matthew Perry, with us both being in our very young, he's I think 12 in that picture, and I'm like 11 or something, or 13, 11. So
I remember that when he passed, I saw that on your page. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm not trying to mine this for clout, but I'm just saying, watching other people go off and do this has influenced me to say, okay, in order to be the kind of person who can be the big rock star or be the Hollywood leading man, you need a certain amount of charisma, and you need a certain amount of draw and pull. You need to be the kind of guy that walks in the room and people want to give you money, and that's why you find a lot of the people. People are so surprised when they look at, some movie star or some rock star, and they go, wow, that person turned out to be a really abusive, dark, manipulative scumbag. I mean, who would have thought? And I'm like, oh, I would, because the same qualities that make people want to throw money at you and say, oh, I want all your records, right, is also the same one that it can corrupt you. So I learned quite quickly that I was good at making content, but I wasn't good at selling it. So it's like, okay, well, I'll make it what I want to make, which is great. I know people joke about, I do the things the way I do because I want the artistic freedom and I don't care about success or anything, but I genuinely don't care about success. I've seen what it does to people. I've seen people enjoy it, and I've seen people
destroyed by it.
So I'm just like, I want to do my thing, and if you like it, that's great, and if you don't, you don't. And it's a refreshing thing to offer. It's like, if you want my record, here it is. If you don't want my record, you don't have to buy it. I'm still going to pay the rent.
No, and I think that's one of the things that first drew me to you is, you are, and whether it's something that you even have a choice in or not, you are completely authentic. You are who you are. It reads very clearly. The way that you conduct yourself on social media, the way that you make music, there's no artifice there. There's no, there's no pompousness. There's nothing like that. It's just, okay, here I am, take me or leave me. Not in a dick way either. Cause some people are like, you don't like me. You don't like me. You're not doing that either. You're going, all right, not everybody likes the same flavor. If I'm not your flavor,
Exactly.
that's cool. Go eat something else, So I mean, appreciate that. Yeah. I do.
There was that other day when there was that person that was complaining about being bullied, and I'm like, just write it off as that's not your client.
Right.
I mean, I don't personally like the music of Insane Clown Posse. I've said this before, I'll say it again, but they've got an audience. I mean, they have tens of thousands of people throwing money at them. Yeah. So you can't say they suck. You can just say, okay, well, that's just not my kind of music.
Exactly.
But to somebody else, they're literally tattooing themselves with the band's logo, and they'll wear that for life proudly.
No, and there's a lid for every pot. I absolutely believe that. Yep. Yeah. No, but okay. So you then, and I know, guys, I understand the song, and I'm talking to the people who are going to be watching when this airs. Don't worry, we're not live. I don't want to mess with you. Right. But I know we're still going with the first question, but Jack's story is fascinating. There are so many pieces to it, and I think it sets us up really nicely for everything that we're going to talk about next, including his music. So I will get to the song, I will get to all that, but I have a plan here. So you then came here, American citizen, you're in Florida, and then you had basically a life change thanks to Henry Rollins.
So that was years ago. No. This was when I was still living in Atlanta. I read. Okay. Sorry, I'm jumping the gun here.
No, you're not.
No, you're talking about. Yeah, no. I Henry Rollins is a fascinating character to me. I've always been drawn to people who march to the beat of their own drummer. Mm-hmm. And he said in an interview that I read in print, where is Generation X's jazz?
Yeah.
And I had been trying to figure out what I was going to do if I was going to make some kind of art or do some kind of, would I write? Would I make film? Would I continue doing music? Mm-hmm. What would I do? Mm-hmm. And his question intrigued me because I had always, like most people, written jazz off as just that stuff you have to learn in middle school, right? I mean, they hand you an instrument you really don't want to play, and you're just sitting there playing just four like whole notes, just and some guy yelling at you and waving a stick, and some of the kids go off and they play the clarinet, kind of, wearing. You know what I mean? It's like
I do.
People that go into the band.
Jazz gets reduced to either that or squeaky noise, or it's inaccessible. Sure. And I'll cop to that. I've had that attitude myself. At
no. Jazz, as did I. I mean, I think somebody the other day on Facebook said, now that I'm Generation X, I got to figure out whether I'm going to segue into jazz, so I listen to completely incomprehensible music that's just noise, or I go into rockabilly and spend my entire life going on weekends to car shows at Whataburger and sit next to a car
Wow. Okay,
and I'm sitting here thinking,
that's a lot of overgeneralization, but okay.
No, it's not mine, but I just
I know whoever this was. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So I went and I thought about it for a second, and then I realized, and I looked into it, and I remembered my first exposure to jazz was in Sesame Street with Cab Calloway's Minnie the Moocher. Right?
Yeah.
And then I did a bit of research because that's the kind of person I am. As I said, I'm neurodivergent. I found out that song actually has a lot of drug references and is possibly about exploiting a runaway.
Wow. Okay.
She loved a man named Smokey because he was cokey. He took her down to Chinatown and taught her how to kick a gong around, which was their slang for picking up an opiate habit. So if you read between the lines,
okay,
she's sleazing around. She's homeless. She's a moocher. She's trying to figure out how to catch things to make a living. He comes by, introduces her to a drug habit, and then has her dreaming about meeting the King of Sweden, who'll give her diamonds and furs and a platinum car with diamond wheels and all that. And I'm like, that sounds like every single pimp's description I've ever heard.
Thank you, Sesame Street.
You want to make a lot of
cocaine? No, yeah,
exactly. But the thing is that it was so opaque, right?
Yeah, right.
That you could. He was singing that with a bunch of Muppets.
Exactly.
And nobody picked up the difference, right?
I'm pretty sure Kermit was tooting at some point. That dude had way too much energy. But okay, so you, and I mean, it's true. We did. Anyone who saw Sesame Street at any point did grow up with quite a breadth of exposure to different things, which was one of the great things about it. But so you already had a little bit of familiarity, but not to the point where you had any intention until you read Henry Rollins saying, you know, where's the jazz for Gen X? And so you did kind of a deep dive at that point, right? Because I, you know, in researching for you, you know, I don't ever like to pretend that I know more than I do. So I'm not going to sit here and say I know the first thing about jazz at all. But I kept noticing you in different things would say, you know, it's neo-noir. Totally get that. You know, and there's some West Coast jazz elements, and I'm going, that's interesting. What does that mean? So, you know, I start digging into, you know, okay, like, you know, bebop and cool jazz and the subgenres and Vince Guaraldi and, you know, like all these different, you know, and I kind of went down the rabbit hole, and it was fascinating to me because there's so much intricacy and overlap and evolution and Venn diagram in the different styles of jazz and the way that they evolved. And then you, which I think this is a good point to talk about, and then we can come back to more of the detail because I do want to play your song before we get too much further. Okay. You have decided to take all of that and do something further with it, which I find fascinating, which is the idea of, you said something like, you know, hip hop samples, right? Like hip hop samples, you know, you take samples and you kind of turn them into their own thing, and you liked the idea of turning things on their head and saying, well, if the technology that we have now existed back then, what might jazz have sounded like? Now, I might be butchering your intent or your philosophy there, but that's sort of the read that I got. And I thought that was really interesting because it modernizes in a way without bastardizing, which I think a lot of times once you do one, you do the other. So, I mean, just quickly before we get into playing the song, when did that kind of coalesce for you? Because again, I want to come back after we play the track to, you know, how you then got into jazz in the first place. But like, what made you think of that? What made you think, okay, you know what, I want to play jazz, but I also want to add this other element to it. And it's great in the music. So I'm so curious about this. Was that question clear?
No.
Okay, good.
So to clarify, so to make it more succinct, what I said was, if rap guys could take jazz and use their technology to sample it and chop it up and make something new with it, I can use that same technology that chopped everything up and go back and do the reverse inverse and make jazz with it. And I found out that it's not exactly that new an idea, and it was kind of inspired slightly by bands like Funky Porcini, Nine Lazy Nine, and some of the acid jazz people in the mid-90s to late 90s who were doing combinations of hip-hop and that. But I found out that during the creation of Bitches Brew, which is a really out there album by Miles Davis, the first fusion jazz album, he basically sat down and he had his musicians just play and just go, and they were like, what do we just play something, man. And then what he would do is he took all the tape, I mean, tons and tons of tape, and then he did what I was first taught to do for audio production, which was get a razor blade, and he sat there and he cut it into pieces and reassembled it. And that's where I get Exquisite Corpse Cabaret from, because Exquisite Corpse is the idea that somebody starts a story and then you sort of fold it up so that you can't read what was written there, and then somebody else write something else after it. And then they fold that up, and then it's an old beat writing technique. Or
I knew the technique, but I didn't know the name. Okay. Oh, that's, I was going to ask you where that came from, but okay. Very cool.
Kadavrikski. Yeah. And then, so basically I sort of shut my brain off and come back to something that I'd previously written and added to it, and then cut it and paste it and manipulate it. And that becomes what I play to, and that becomes what we play. He basically took that tape after he cut it all up, and then he played it back to the musicians and said, now go learn that. You can't tell them you can't. You played it in the first place.
It's true. Using their own talent against them. I like it. Okay. So listen, let's let the people hear. I know many have already, but for anybody who's not familiar with Jack Phantom and the Exquisite Corpse Cabaret, you are in for a treat, because I'm going to just go ahead and say it. I am not somebody who traditionally thinks of myself as enjoying jazz, and not because I have this sort of genre bias against it, but because I've often found it kind of inaccessible. You know, I don't understand what I'm supposed to be feeling. It's almost, to me, in a lot of senses, too cerebral rather than emotional, and it's not how I tend to connect to music. And I really like Jack Phantom's music. I do. It is moody, and the noir bit just fascinates me because it's so cinematic. We're going to get into all of that. So this is a song called, and I'm probably butchering this, but nobody knows for sure. So anyone who speaks Chinese can in the comments correct me, but this is a song called Jiangxi Stomp. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about the Jiangxi and just a little bit, and we'll play it and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it more.
So there's a whole thing around Taoists back in the day. There was a legend about them dealing with the consequences of an army fighting another army and them having a bunch of corpses around and not knowing how to transport them all back, to just animating them, and they would just hop home. So basically get the corpses to walk themselves home. And then over time that sort of mutated into like a cross between a vampire and a ghoul and a zombie, because they're an animated corpse, but they can also steal people's life force. And I would, never read stuff like this before bed. I had this fascinating dream. I had this fascinating dream about a contract killing that took place with two guys animating a corpse to go after somebody because you could never prove even how that person had died. And
that'd be a great movie.
That's
a screenplay. Yeah,
that's a video I want to do, or I might even write it.
Nobody take that from him. Jack is trademarking it right now. We're trademarking it right now. Okay, so again, you're going into a Chinese zombie hopping corpse thing, and so it's just as cool as it sounds. So let's roll by Jack Phantom and the Exquisite Corpse Cabaret, Jiangxi Stomp. I'm so glad that you picked this one, especially given where our ellipsis ended off in terms of how you approach music, because, the first thing I'm struck by is the hip hop beat in this song,
Yes.
and it's not something that I would expect to encounter on a neo-noir jazz album. But again, knowing the little that I know, as you're saying, it's not unprecedented, but then you've got these, is that an Uru? I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's an Uru playing in there.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it's a Bawu or what. But so, you've got these very traditional Asian musical sounds built in, and then Chinese hopping vampires. So talk to me about where this song came from. And I guess maybe this is a good place for us to start the conversation about your songwriting process, because how else do we describe what you did except to talk about that? And it may vary from song to song. But so, whether you want to use this as a particular vehicle or just speak about it more generally, or both. Yeah.
So I don't like the term noir, because if you talk about noir jazz, people get this mental image or at least emotional image of that very cliche, stereotypical
dark and stormy night.
Yeah. Or some guy standing underneath a street lamp going, there were 3 shots in me, 2 of them were bourbon and 1 was a 38 that just missed my heart. And there's somebody playing a trumpet in the distance, and it's exactly. So
with the mute,
I wanted to get away.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you had actually referred to your own music as neo-noir, but that's very good for me to know.
Neo-noir.
Oh, okay. So that was okay to say, but not noir.
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, noir music would be a very, very sort of cliched, but neo, like new, like different.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
okay,
okay. So as somebody who's formerly a punk and formerly into goth, everything I do has got a sort of a minor key or a dark bent to it.
Yeah.
But the 2 things I wanted to avoid musically, I almost went into doing electronic music, but then I heard Covenant from Sweden, and I actually wrote to them and I said, thank you for being so amazing at doing that it sort of discouraged me from ever, I would sound like that if I tried to do that, and you already exist, so thank you.
Okay.
And they were like, that's fine. And so I ended up saying, okay. But the 2 things I didn't want to do was, you said that jazz music was incomprehensible.
Or at least inaccessible, yeah.
So what happened there was, it started out with being basically a music you could dance to. It was a dance music. It was a music that you could sit back and have some sort of mood to. Like if you listen to Kind of Blue by Miles Davis, there's these beautiful. The jazz records that sold the most were the ones that were the simplest. Take 5 by Paul Desmond, right?
Yeah.
Kind of Blue, So What by Miles Davis. Even something like the Linus and Lucy bit by Vince Guaraldi, they were simple melodies that you could remember. But what happened with jazz was, what would happen is the musicians, after they played the gig, would meet up backstage afterwards and have these little competitions as to who could wave the bigger, stick.
Yeah,
and the other person, watch me play this 3 times as fast. Oh yeah, well, watch me. And it sort of became a thing, if you're a real jazz head, if you're a real musician, then you basically look at this sort of competition show off mode. And I actually for a long time had a print subscription online to Playboy to read interviews with some of these guys. They
really did. It's a joke, but they really do have great articles. So I actually understand that. Yeah.
No, there's a text archive and it's searchable. So I maintained that for a while because I could go and I could say, okay, what were people saying back in the 50s? And Count Basie hated. I know we're off the topic of what you're asking.
No, it's all the topic. No, we're good.
So Count Basie hated the bebop people. He was like, are you kidding me? How can you dance? How can you remember what's being played if it's just an exercise? And again, I'm not taking anything away from anybody who likes bebop or any of that kind of thing. No. But I'm speaking to you saying, as the average casual listener, it kind of went from something that you could listen to, remember, and play along with, to something that was for real musicians. And some guitar rock went that way too, like Racer X or Dragon Force. You can kind of listen to that, and one of the things that really turned me off doing that kind of thing was, again, as a teenager, everyone wanted, in the 80s, everyone wanted to be Edward Van Halen, everyone wanted to be Yngwie Malmsteen, everyone wanted to be that guy from Extreme, so, I learned how to play really fast.
Yeah.
And everyone just kind of looked at that and said, okay, that's great for like 15 seconds, but now it's like a dentist drill. Would you please stop? Right. So it's like, okay. Good. So that frees me up to try to sort of go back to back to basics. So a dance music. So there's a hip hop beat in that particular song simply because, well, why not? Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I got the idea for some of the more world instrumentation, first from having listened to a lot of music all over the world, but also from Yusef Lateef, who is a jazz musician who was one of the first people to start using things like a shakuhachi or a bass flute in some of his compositions. And he played some really neat, really moody music. And I was really into him. As a matter of fact, I can't reach it, but one of his books is here, his scale patterns books, where, he's researched all these different scales from all over the world, and, the Egyptian scales and Persian scales and different Chinese modes and stuff like that. So, so back to what I do is I have an idea of a mood I want. I have an idea of the structure of the song that I want to do. And, I'll sit there and I'll experiment and I'll play different things. And then I'll go back and I'll sort of move them around and cut them and paste them back and play them again.
Okay.
And that gives me sort of a foundation of, in some cases, quite a few layers of things going through. And I always try to think of a song as having a beginning and a middle and an end, just as a solo has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You have a structure to it. You're sort of drawn through it. You have a part where you're introduced to what you're doing. You have this bit that mounts into this very, very low bit in the middle, and then it picks up again towards the ending, which in this particular song just sort of drifts off.
Right. We're back to storytelling, like you said, right? It's just a different form of storytelling. Okay, so you have a mood you're going for, you have a structure that you want to affect, at least loosely. Okay.
So, this is going to blow your mind. One of the things that I was actually also inspired by was pro wrestling.
Okay. Jack, you were full of surprises. Okay, talk to me about that. Pro wrestling. Okay.
So growing up in Canada, pro wrestling is a huge part of everyone's upbringing, whether you really cared about it or no, there's a lot of, as a matter of fact, Hawkesbury, which is about 45 minutes to an hour away from where I grew up, had one of the biggest Mexican wrestlers from there, El Vampiro Canadiense, the Canadian vampire. He ended up like a soap opera star and doing a whole bunch of stuff down there. And so we had a lot of really big names come through our area. But one of the things that struck me was listening to, I remembered some of these things as being better than the stuff you see these days. And listening to some of the guys that used to do this stuff back in the day, they said, you're trying to convince an audience that there's a fight going on. So you're pulling the audience into a story, right? So it's not just, okay, you're going to clothesline me, you're going to throw me over there. There was a match that I once saw and it was just a throwaway thing in Hawkesbury on TV. And the crowd really wanted to kill these two guys because, one guy would be thrown into a corner and then these two guys would work him over and the ref would try to get over there and the other guy would interfere and the ref would be, hey, and of course back was turned. So they start choking this guy and the audience was absolutely on its feet. And the guys on the stage, right, even though they're pretending to hit each other and everything, everybody knew it. They were so caught up by the drama that these guys were setting up. Everybody could relate to being cheated. Everybody could relate to a 2-on-1. Everyone could relate to wanting to go in and help, but being held back by an authority figure, right? That when they finally made the legit tag 30 minutes in, this other poor guy basically crawls out of the ring and this other guy comes in like the wrath of God. I mean, the rafters practically came off the place. And everybody there knew it was fake. And everybody, well, not fake, but you get my point, right?
Yeah, but yeah.
But I watched that and I realized, and this is the same thing, like somebody pointed out that the fight at the end of Star Wars and the fight at the end of this first movie is exactly the same conflict between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader. And the first time it's a guy with a mask on and he can't see where he's going, and a guy who was in his 70s who could barely hold the thing he was doing. And if you look at it, there's very little action, but you remember it because there's so much emotional content to it.
Yep.
These guys weren't really doing anything particularly choreographed or theatrical with it, but they were telling a story. They were getting you involved and immersed in what they were doing. And then when you watch the special effects CGI thing and they're all doing backflips and jumping, it's 45 minutes long and nobody cares, right?
Yeah.
And I've heard the complaint about modern pro wrestling is now that everyone kind of knows the secret, it's all about backflips and jumping off the top, and coming back from a supposed neck injury. And it's like, where's the storytelling?
Exactly. Well, that's like movies too. We've lost the thread. We're just trying to dazzle people visually and they're not feeling anything, I'm right there with you. Okay, that makes
Exactly.
a lot of sense. Okay, so you're putting that together with all the jazz
Right.
bits and okay.
So to me, it's like what works. So again, back to Henry Rollins, it's like, what did Generation X do? And it's like
Mm.
it responded to guitar metal with all the notes by playing Nirvana. I mean, like Melvin's 3-chord rock. You know, they just said, look,
Mhm.
we're going to strip this down to its very beginning.
Exactly.
Right. So I said, okay, if I'm going to do that and I'm going to play jazz, I'm going to play very simply. I'm not going to do anything that jazz people would be impressed by.
Mhm.
And I've caught some flack from some people about that. They're like, you really don't have any talent. It's like, that's totally fine. I'm good. But
Okay.
I wanted to play something that you would listen to
Right. Right.
and you would go, okay, all right, I haven't heard this before, which is
Mhm.
exactly what, the Melvins did, which is exactly what, some
Mhm.
of these punk bands did. They came out of the gate hip hop. I mean, these guys that came out, I mean, who would have thought to combine Chinese movies and hip hop
Yeah.
and get 12 dissimilar artists together in a literal clan
Yeah.
to tell a bigger narrative about, I mean, they
And
developed this whole
nobody
world
doesn't
building, right?
know Wu. Everybody knows Wu. Like
Right.
everybody knows them. Like even if you
Everybody.
don't know them, you know them. Like you're
Right.
exactly right. And because it's interesting and it's new and it's not flashy new with no balls or content to it. It's innovating, and
It was compelling.
absolutely exactly. Yeah. No. And
So,
really, I think.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
No, so that was my answer to the question is, okay, it
Mhm.
would be stripped down. It would be in a minor key.
Mhm.
It would be gritty. It would be nihilistic almost,
Mhm.
but yeah, everything that Gen X is known for, sort of sarcasm,
Right.
going off in a
Daria.
different
Yeah.
direction, not particularly caring if it's commercial,
Mhm.
and maybe it takes off and maybe it doesn't.
Mhm.
You know?
Mhm. No,
Sorry,
I
back to what
really,
you're
but
asking.
no, it's a good look. My questions are really just excuses to get people to tell me what they want to tell me. So I'm always happy with what the answer is, even if it doesn't, because half the time I don't even remember what the hell my question was in the first place. So
Okay.
I'm good. I'm really enjoying this. So I mean, one of the things that I noticed in listening to your music, and you've got 2 albums out. You've got Call of the Void and you've got Ghosts, right? So and the complete albums, and I know, the different inspirations obviously, but is that I wasn't struggling to get into it. And I don't mean like get into enjoy. I mean like get into as in get into the mindset, get into the headspace, get into the emotional space, like connect to it and understand it. Because I don't need to necessarily grok music in an intellectual sense to enjoy it. But as I said earlier, I think a lot of the time what has put me at a remove from jazz is that intellectualism, that idea. And it makes a lot of sense what you said, that, that there was basically this, who's got the big stick, competition kind of nature of let's just make it as, fast or as jazzy or as many triplets or as many this or as many that as possible. And it's like, that's not the point, in the same way that like, I know there are probably women out there where like a guy's like, woo, and like, I never have ever been interested in that ever. Like, don't show me your feathers. Like, who are you as a person? But like you,
Let me be clear that when they were doing that, they weren't necessarily doing that to. Joe Morello once famously said, and he was the guy that really kind of got me into jazz.
Mhm.
He said that he was actually felt bad because he would sort of demonstrate something to somebody, and he would play it like really, really fast because he was just talking. He didn't want to take too much time to play it, so he'd be like, "Oh yeah, the first part of it's kind of like," and
Okay.
then he didn't realize that the other person was absolutely crestfallen, that they realized they could never match his
Couldn't do
speed at
that.
it, and they'd walk
Yeah.
away.
Okay.
And he was just like, "Oh, I can play like this, right? But I'm not doing it to
Not
beat you
show
down or
off.
to show I'm better
Yeah.
than you, right?"
Okay.
And I think somebody like John Coltrane, who drew these mandalas, with relationships between different chords and different everything else like that. I mean, jazz is in its truest form. It is quite complicated, and there is quite a bit to learn if you want to do it properly. I mean, you have to spend at least a year and a half of dedicated, 8-hour-a-day study to understand, the different. So there is a certain thing to what you're saying that, to somebody who doesn't want to learn that, to appreciate it. Yeah, that can be a barrier. And to me, it was just, I'd done the speed metal thing. I didn't want to do it again.
Yeah.
When I heard it, it's not what I got out of it. So
Yeah.
yeah. But I just didn't want anybody to think that I was saying that, jazz players were elitist or that they were
Oh,
trying
no,
to,
again, that's my gloss. No one will hold you, responsible or accountable for things that come out of my mouth. Don't worry. But I'm glad that you clarified, because I don't want to walk away with a mistaken impression
Sure.
either. But I think that, one of the things that I was learning the tiniest bit about, again, and just trying to be able to speak even remotely intelligently to you about jazz on any level, was this idea of the differences in, the kinds of jazz. And I know that's a broad swath, but I mean, this idea that, what I'm understanding is like the West Coast jazz tends to be more composed than improv. It tends to be a little more structured. It tends to be, and I think that maybe in a way, because I mean, you mentioned, Vince Guaraldi, so did I, like Linus and Lucy and all of that. Anybody who grew up on the Peanuts grew up on jazz in that way, and loved it. And I mean, still, there's something visceral and primal about that. You put that on and it's like, because you remember that and you feel, and it does tell such a story. And it's so, if you took that music out of the Peanuts, people wouldn't love the Peanuts as much as they did, and it's just, it's part of it, and I think that, what I started to think of, and it's given me actually, and I'm going to have to talk to you later about like some other people that you would recommend listening to, because I've heard Miles Davis, and what's the big, is it Blue? Is that the big,
Kind of Blue is, that's
Kind of Blue.
one of the best selling, Kind of Blue.
Right. Okay. So like, I mean, I know like the, top 40 hit version of a lot of jazz. Exactly. Right. But so, and I mean, I've heard Brubeck but like it's that there are different kinds of jazz that might be less difficult for me to connect to. And your music really, first and foremost, has taught me that, that I can sit there and I can come to something that, in my head, I'm going, geez, I really hope I like this, because I like Jack and whatever. And I've heard, we played DSRA on one of the Vox and Guest lives that we did, and I really enjoyed it. And so I knew I liked your music from having heard it. But, there's a difference between listening to, 3/40 of a song as an offshoot and then listening to, an hour and change of albums and really closely listening to them. And I really just let into it. I just closed my eyes and I put your stuff on and I sat back and I just, and you do tell a story, and it's warm, even though it's, it is, Gen X, and it is, there's a certain level, as you said, of, disaffected, whatever to that. But there's also a warmth to it. Some of it is instrumental and sonic. Some of it is just what you're doing. And so I really appreciated that. I really did.
Well, one of the undercurrents in a lot of the sort of darker music anyway is, I mean, if you listen to some of the goth music, it's very pretty. And a lot of the original goth, I mean, they dressed in laces and stuff. I mean, even though it was, about gloom and death and spires and gray and all this other kind of stuff, there was still an attempt. I mean, The Cure have Friday I'm in Love, right? I mean, they still have their brighter moments, even though they wrote really Fascination dark. Street, but they also, I mean, you can't be, I think it was Bill Lieb of Frontline Assembly that basically said that the reason why he did a side project like Delirium is there's only so many new ways you can paint a wall black.
That's a great line. Yeah.
And, one of the things I think would be a challenge, and one of the reasons why I really like guys who can do industrial music or dark techno or even like certain types of metal, is that there's a real tendency and a real pull to just hit that minor second. One then, and a minor second, then down, and then a minor second. And the number of songs that have done, like, for example, Spoiler by the one that's off the Cyberpunk 2077 soundtrack.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to help you there.
Sorry, it's the same sort of general gist as you find in Eurobashing by Front 242 or Losing It by Fisher. Then techno lends itself, and darker music sometimes, and certain types of black metal and
metal,
really satanic metal does that kind of like, and there's only so many ways you can play it like that before it gets
monotonous
really
or
yeah.
The
other direction you can go to it, and I'll cite another influence and definitely thank them, is Celtic Frost, which I listened to a lot of as a kid.
Kurt from Crypt 13 is really happy right now. Yeah.
Well, Well, the thing is Thomas Gabriel Fisher or Tom Warrior, depending however you want to
I just call him Tommy,
Yeah, sure. But no, he had apparently a very lonely childhood, and he sat there
Okay.
listening to a lot of music. And so when he decided to get out of Hellhammer and do some other thing, he approached Giger to say, "Can I use some of your artwork?" And explained what he was doing. And Giger lent his artwork, saying, "This is beyond music. You've got a philosophy. You're trying to do something." And then when Into the Pandemonium came out, and he was using symphonic elements. He had a symphony playing, because at that time you could rent a symphony in Eastern Europe for very short money. So basically, he said, "Look, this is the idea. You score it and you play it." And they did music with that, and they had drum machines come in with it, one in their pride, and strings and choirs, and the metal guys were like, "What the hell is this? This sucks. Go back to Circle of the Tyrants," right? And like 15 years later, you're hard pressed to find any metal tune now that doesn't have symphonic or choral elements.
Yeah.
And they were sitting
This might be a good place for my anger overdose shout out, but yeah, I hear you. And it's true. And it's so, but you're right that it's important to iterate. You cannot stay in any one lane, in any one thought, in any one feeling without any nuance or shade or movement of any kind, of no matter what it is, for very long, because at a certain point, even if it's beautiful, it's like looking at I don't know who watches these things, but like, a Miss America pageant or whatever.
El Salvador! Finland!
Or after a while, you're like, okay, that's like the 43rd really pretty girl that just walked. Like, I get it. Like, I get it,
Yeah.
So I hear you. And I think that, it's so important to, what you said about, goths, the sort of like everything was very dark, but there's a lot of beauty in darkness, and I think that's where a lot of that connected. It's that there's, I think we maybe all had the experience of, unrequited love, where it's so painful, but there's something so gorgeous about it too, because you're alive and you're feeling all of that. And I think that anything that connects to an emotion like that is going to succeed. But I really did find it interesting that, again, just listening through, and I want to get into more of your music specifically, because I do like to do that. The idea that I read something about like the West Coast jazz versus, they don't call it East Coast jazz, the other one, do they? It's just other jazz. Yeah.
There's just a group of people in the West Coast playing a certain way. It's like the idea of the Bakersfield sound or something like that. They were just certain people get an idiom and they just sort of
run with it. And I know some of the people who kind of were vanguards in that don't even particularly love the phrase because it's restrictive, because there were a lot of people who were in that scene who lived in New York or whatever. So it wasn't all West Coast. But I read something where they said something like, if you listen to like a Miles Davis or a Brubeck, or a Lester Young, and you listen then to like a Count Basie or whatever, it was kind of the difference between pastels and primary colors, that there was a sharpness and I thought that was fascinating, that I think was sort of the way that I began to think my way into how I could feel more about jazz, that maybe I had been listening to the wrong kind of jazz for me.
No.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing to think about is that the way it was shaped, the jazz has been shaped over the years by like, for example, you talk about Basie in the big band era, when they had all of these different musicians and they were playing this very happy, bouncy, danceable music, right?
Yeah.
Because that was what you did. I mean, especially in the 1920s, everyone thought the party was going to last forever, right?
Right.
And then you had a war, and not everybody came back. So you had a lot of guys coming back together saying, "Hey, let's get the band back together."
Yeah.
And they only found 3 people or 4 people of the 20 that went over that they knew. Now, some people, they picked up, they made new friends, they learned new skills or whatever. But the days of having a big group of people were kind of gone, because in some cases these guys just couldn't find, because they weren't with us anymore.
Yeah.
So there was more of an edge to it. And if you read some of the biographies of some of the folks, I'm not saying that the 20s were a wonderful time if you were a person of color, but if you read like Art Pepper's biography, it's harrowing. If you learn how many of these people were addicted to heroin and were just in a really dark place, or the struggles of somebody like Thelonious Monk, who, took the rap for drugs that weren't his and ended up not being able to work for the longest time and being told that his music was garbage, and, trying to scrape together a living, and it just, and then dealing with stigma of people thinking he was mentally ill and giving him all kinds of experimental drugs that very possibly did make him mentally ill. I mean, a lot of it was shaped by tragedy, which is why you find as it moves on, towards the 70s and stuff like that, it starts getting a bit more somber, and it starts getting a bit more stripped down, and it starts getting a bit more adventurous,
No, and again, that's what I mean. It's like how I imagine a film student will watch a Kubrick movie, where, the casual viewer will enjoy it, but, the film student's going to get all these Easter eggs and see all, Dutch angles and whatever. They're going to know all this stuff that most of us are not, and I feel like that's something that I feel like I had been kind of missing out on, not having enough knowledge to really appreciate some of that stuff. But, music isn't really something I particularly want to appreciate. I want to enjoy, and so I guess my long point that I keep remaking kind of is the idea that, I'm learning to enjoy jazz when I didn't really expect to.
I joke that I make jazz for people who don't like jazz.
Well, there you go. But I think that's probably true, actually. And I think what's cool about that is that, knowing now that I can feel that way, makes me more interested in trying to find other jazz that I like. So okay, so you had an EP come out, an LP rather come out. August 2019, right? So Call of the Void.
Something. Yes.
And what was the inspiration for that? Where did you start? Because you said, at the beginning when you're writing, you have a mood that you want to affect, right? So, is that the story that you want to tell? Is that just the feeling that you want to convey? Like, what is the and
inclusive or?
Okay.
I mean, so Call of the Void was actually wonderful because I was basically starting out in playing the saxophone, and I had some songs which I was writing. And one of my little secrets is I like to write songs in a different idiom sometimes, and then convert them to jazz songs.
Oh, no kidding. Okay. Like what? So what other?
Well, Baby Baby started out as a disco song. It's actually straight up disco.
Okay, yeah.
And then I rewrote it. No, because to break out of a rut, you say, okay, well, what if I try doing this? In addition to playing something backwards or cutting it up and chopping it, sometimes you're like, all right, I'm going to write a metal song, and then I'm going to see how it then works if I take it and move it over this way. I wanted to do my own covers of my own type of stuff, right?
Okay.
But as I was working this out and working this through, I was hanging around a music store, which naturally you do, and playing some of the stuff that I was experimenting with just to the people behind the counter, because they were like, what are you doing with it? I mean, most people that buy this stuff are, middle school students going out for band, right? Yeah. And I played it to him, and the guy said, he used to run the biggest studio in Florida, but he had his equipment that he just moved into his basement, and he's like, come over, I'll record this stuff for you. Like, I want to hear it. Like, I want to hear the final product.
Wow.
So I will make you an insane deal on professional studio time.
That's a vote of confidence. Okay.
Well, yeah, he was curious to hear the end product. So I sat down. Of course, the pressure was on me now to take some of these songs and make them more fully fleshed. And some of them I definitely had ideas about. Like Heroin Girl is about a friend of mine who I knew when I was in college, who was a hitman in the apartment next door. Naturally, a song for Amy is for my wife, who's been really special to me. Some of the other bits and pieces there, for example, The Axeman Cometh is about one of the first serial killers of the 20th century, who's the Axeman of New Orleans.
Okay.
And if you're not familiar with the story, the short version of it was, guy basically butchers a bunch of people in New Orleans with an axe or some other kind of weapon, and then writes into the newspaper and says, anybody playing jazz in their house, I'll skip their home. I won't come into their house and I won't attack them if I can hear jazz, because I love jazz. Wow. And then gone on about how he was a demon and he was from hell, and he found New Orleans too cold. He preferred his native Tartarus and everything else like that. So the first music that was truly associated with murder and Satanism and everything else like that wasn't heavy metal. It was jazz.
Yes. Okay. Alrighty. That's definitely not something I would have just gotten. Okay. And so So you
in the middle of that song,
go ahead.
No, saying in the middle of that song, if you hear, you approach somebody listening to a Dixieland tune, and then it moves away.
Yes,
it's a nice little nod to how he would have been stalking.
I see. Okay, yeah, because you do have that. It's that Dixieland clip is one of those things where you just automatically recognize it. You know where you're going. You know where it's from, and so okay, and yeah, it does.
And it's public domain. It's public domain. So yeah,
there you go. You're like, don't come at me anyway. But okay, so you had picked up the sax, which I guess we didn't really get to. Now, what kind or kinds of saxophone do you play, first of all?
So I started out on the alto.
Okay.
I really liked Paul Desmond. As I said, my gateway really into it was listening to, I was in Guitar Center and I was a drummer at the time, and I heard Joe Morello play, and I became absolutely enamored of Joe Morello. I bought a signed drum head that he'd signed for somebody, and I have a set of stix that he had endorsed.
Okay.
And I wanted to play like Joe Morello, so I listened to all of the Dave Brubeck type stuff.
Okay.
And of course, one part of the magic of that was listening to Paul Desmond play. And up until then, I hadn't considered playing the saxophone because I didn't like the sound of the saxophone the way most people played it.
Oh, okay.
That whole sort of like Saturday Night Live band, when they're introduced to friends, somebody screeching and wailing away.
Yeah,
And that's how a lot of people like to hear it. I'm not putting it down, but I'm saying I heard that, and I was like, that's not what I want to sound like, right?
Not your flavor. Yeah.
And then I heard somebody named Sigurd Rascher play, who's a classical saxophonist, and it sounded like a flute or an oboe. So I was kind of kicking around with a sax. I didn't really know what I was doing with it, and I was really fortunate to go to the Atlanta Saxophone Day and run into a jazz mouthpiece maker by the name of Jody Espina, Dr. Jody Espina.
Okay.
And I said to him, look, I've got the sound in my head, and I think I know what I want to do. And he said, okay, play this, play this, play this. And he took notes, right? He was really awesome, and I can't thank the guy enough, right? And then finally he's like, wait a minute, I think I know what you're going for. And then he reached under the counter and pulled out some prototypes and said, try this. And I played it. He says, okay, hold on. Let me just write some things down. Even though my skill level wasn't real. I mean, I knew how to play, right? But I wasn't, particular. He was like, no, I think, hey, hold on. And he pulled out a couple of others. And he goes, thank you so much. And then they came out with another line of mouthpieces. And I met him at a later show. And I said, wait a minute, was I a beta tester? Influence? And he was like, yeah, those were the mouthpieces you were trying. So I said, would you mind signing mine? So I have it's not here, it's in a box somewhere, but I have like the case of it, and it's signed from him.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So, but that's what got me really started was the alto sax. I really liked the sound once I heard Rascher playing and that sort of classical sound.
Just to jump in, because I like the detail bits. So when you say what you were going for, was it what you do now? Was that always was that what you were playing for him? That was
yes.
Okay. So it was sort of that more soulful, warmer, rounder, richer tone rather than the sharp, kind of squealy,
clarinet, like
almost woodwindy. Yeah. Okay,
yes.
so that was always your
right.
That was always your sound. That was always
the sound I had in my head. That's what I wanted. Yes,
absolutely. And that mostly came from Paul Desmond. Now, is that a lot like what he did, or is that like an offshoot of what he did?
Well, no, he was the person that got me interested in the idea of that particular instrument and how it could sound, because he had a very, very dry, very mellow sound. But then, as I said, I heard Sigurd Rascher, and I'll send you a clip after this for you to listen to.
Yeah.
And you'll hear, and I'll occasionly hide the phone from somebody, and they'll be like, "Is somebody playing a flute or are they playing a clarinet?" And I turn it around, and it's him, and he's in white tail and ties, and he's playing a saxophone. And the other awesome thing is he starts doing some little popping things at the end by doing sort of almost beatboxing with it. And there's some
almost like a didgeridoo or something like that, where it's like
he's making popping sounds. It's actually percussive.
Yeah, right. But in that way where you can go, you can kind of get that. Is he doing it with it? He's just doing it? Oh, I see. So he's not voicing it. He's playing. I gotcha. Okay, I gotcha.
Yeah, when you hear it, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's like, okay, yeah, it's a percussive element in it. Yeah.
And so, I mean, is that sound in the voicing? I know it's in the mouthpiece, but is it also breath control? Is it around, how you're okay, so you then had to, you really are a reverse engineer. You like to reverse engineer. So you had to reverse engineer how to make the sound that you had in your head come out of your saxophone. So how did you... Was that just a lot of trial and error? How much of it was solved by the mouthpiece that you got? Was there, and do you feel you've refined it to where you want? Like, do you have, is what is in your head and what is on your, on your Spotify the same thing? How
Yes.
close is that?
No.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
It is there.
Okay.
Yeah. And no. At first, I bought secondhand from a guy from a car in Atlanta, the same mouthpiece that Paul Desmond used. It's very hard to come by.
Oh, wow.
And I played it, and it's like, okay, not quite. And that's why I was kind of struggling. I had a whole drawer full of different attempts. I bought Rasher's mouthpiece. I bought a bunch of other things. And yeah, the shape matters. It turns out that a lot of the sound that you get out of a saxophone is from the mouthpiece and the reed. So I went through a ton of reeds, and I went through quite a few mouthpieces until I dialed it in.
Okay.
And you'll pry that Chettaville mouthpiece from my cold dead hands. I absolutely love it. I mean, that with the right Van Doren reed, and it just has that sound that I truly love.
Softer reed, harder reed?
Softer. It's
Okay.
you go for a harder one if you want it to be breathy, but I don't want to have to put so much oomph into it. I really want to purr
Be
with
able
it. So
to
I don't want
sing.
to
Yeah, purr is a great word. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, and I know I this was a gigantic parentheses, but so you started with
No
the
worries.
alto sax and.
Well, then I obviously I wanted to play some tenor sax as well.
Yeah.
Which I've done. There's some sounds because, and again, I struggled with that because I really didn't want to sound like, your stereotypical noir piece, or
Right.
even worse, that whole, you're watching a kung fu movie from the 70s and they're playing like, the girl walks in and she starts swaggering hips a bit.
Oh, yeah.
And you hear that awful,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I did not want that at all. So I was a little more, I was a little more cautious with that. And I went through a few tenors, and right now it's between a Mauriat, and I just picked up a Bucher from the 1950s, an aristocrat, off a gentleman who was basically funding some prosthesis because he'd lost a couple of fingers, but he wanted to keep playing. So, and so I was like, yeah, no, even though I want this, I feel even better now that I bought it off you.
Right.
And that with a Jody Jazz Dark DV, or a SYOS, I'm sort of vacillating between the two, and a slightly heavier reed.
Okay.
I'm getting the sound I want. I'm using a jazz reed for that one because you really do want some of that velvet in there. You don't want it too classical or too clean, because in that register it's just weird. It's like when you scale an instrument up or down, there's different things you want from it. So for example, I have a soprano saxophone that I've yet to play on something, and I'm trying to find the right place to use it. But I'm using a Chettaville classical mouthpiece and playing it to sound almost like the duduk that you hear in, if you've ever heard Peter Gabriel's Passion soundtrack.
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful song.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. Yeah.
Where that duduk comes in, I will play that piece over and over again and try to get that to sound as much like that as possible, or almost oboish, instead of, the classic sound that you associate with either Sidney Bechet's stuff, in the 20s, or Kenny G, which is the other very famous soprano.
Yeah.
I wanted to do something else with that. So, and then the other thing I did was I listened to a lot of Doctor Who back in the 1970s. And they used a lot of bass clarinet to get so that, the monster's coming down the corridor.
Ominous kind of. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And then I really lucked in because on top of the bass clarinet, there was a guy at a funeral home near here who was selling a contra alto clarinet, which is like almost as tall as I am. And so I got that off him for very short money. And it was really wild. It was one of the most noir things I've ever done. I go in through the back door, down into this coroner's office right next to the room where they actually prepare the bodies with the, the
embalming. Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a light overhead, so you got that lighting, and I'm in a suit, right? And he's like, you got the money? And I'm like, yeah, you got it. He says, he puts it on the table, snap, 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 and open it up, right?
Great.
And I'm looking at it and nodding, and I count out, $100 bills to him. Yep, here you go. And then I pick that up, like, yeah, this will work, and then put it back in and get it out to my car. And I'm walking out the thing of this funeral home, and people are just saying to me, like, that is just so you. That is such a you story. But you went and bought, and of course, it turns out, like, sometime later, that same place was in the news because one of the employees there had decided no longer to be with us in the parking lot. So, yeah, there's a grim story around the whole thing, and it's like, yeah, how does that find you? How does that find you, Jack? It's like, well, it just naturally.
I feel like you missed an opportunity after you walked out of that office to find a street lamp and stand under it with a fedora and light up a smoke and say, I got 3 shots in me. And I feel like that would have been a perfect moment for that. But okay, so
except it was a Florida summer, you know, like
yeah,
summer
well, you know, in my head, it's not. In my head,
yeah, okay.
you know, you live in, you know, I don't know, London
Gotcha.
or so. I have no idea. But yeah, but no, I know Pensacola is not exactly
I gotcha.
the right, you know, the right aesthetic for that. But no, but okay, so you really then, it's a matter of not only, you know, learning jazz, learning about jazz, but finding your voice as whatever kind of instrumentalist you become, or, you know, series of them in your case. But so you found what you wanted, you had it in your head, you managed to reverse engineer it. And so at what point then did you start working on Call of the Void? Was that as you were working on that? Did you have to get your sound? But okay, so is that the stuff that you were playing that they wanted to hear, that then the guy said, I'm going to cut you this insane deal? Okay. All right.
Yes,
So pick up the story for me there.
So yeah, so basically I took a few days off work and we went into the guy's basement and, you know, we recorded everything.
Mm-hmm.
I had to do more takes than need to be because I wasn't as good as a musician as I am now, but we got that together and then he sat there and he mastered it. And I put it together and I listened to it and he listened to it. He said, you know, wow, this is really interesting. This is what I thought it would be. And I listened to it and I was very happy with it. And I'm like, great. Now I'm going to see if I can, you know, DIY and get some shows together and take this out and see who will listen to it.
Yeah.
And, you know, the fascinating thing is that if you do something that's a little too off the beaten track, it's very hard to program. So, you know, like who do you pair a band with if they're, you can imagine being like the first rap group. You walk in there, it's like, hey, well, so this is our thing. We got a guy who plays 2 records and we got 2 guys who talk.
Right.
And they're like, oh yeah, what does this go on before Aerosmith, after Aerosmith? What are you trying to do? Trying to come in my office? See,
right.
business,
What do I lead
records,
out from, and what do I lead
get
into
out of my
with
office?
that?
You know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, of course, 5 years later, everyone's doing it, so you get this, you know, concert with Houdini, Grandmaster Flash. But the first guys that did this had a hell of a time trying to convince people that they were doing that, right? So that, so I was prepared for that, but I wasn't prepared for COVID. Yeah. And then, you know, COVID just took the legs out from everybody, personally and professionally. And you know, a few people around me died. We moved to Florida, and so yeah, so then it was like a whole period of just like completely going over, looking at all the people that had been lost, and that's what Ghosts came from.
Yeah.
Call of the Void was just like, okay, who am I as a person? You know, I'm middle-aged and I'm staring death. It's no longer the sort of idealized, you know, Edgar Allan Poe thing of my goth youth. It's now something that's very real and very happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Ghosts happened, and it's like just, you had all these people just literally staying inside away from plague. And one of the songs on Ghosts was based on a news story that I had read about them just finding a baby. And what had happened was the parents had died, and they had both died of COVID, but there was no one left to look after the baby, and nobody was checking on anybody because, so that baby just lay there and slowly starved to death, completely unaware and just completely mystified as to anything that was happening, even realizing it was dying, right? And, you know, people talk about horror and they'll talk about serial killers, or they'll talk about, you know, monsters. There is so much ambient horror in this world, and I've always been, unfortunately, not fascinated by it as like somebody who wants to participate in it, but just somebody who just recognizes just how much darkness is out there and how much light there is behind that darkness just struggling to burst through.
Which song is that?
That's A Lonely Death in Alabama.
Lonely Death in Alabama. Okay. Yeah, that's I mean, that's the one that starts with the, is it a cello? That very ominous kind of low.
Oh yeah, and no, it's not a cello. It's I mean, I use synthesizers as well. So
right, yeah.
There's it's a synthesizer.
That's a synth note. Okay, I got you. Yeah, and it just from that, right there,
you know, electric piano comes in, and then the tenor. That was the song for the tenor sax to come in and play a very bluesy line, because it's you know, the Deep South.
Well, and it's interesting to me too, because in that I heard some Summertime. You know, summertime and the living's easy. There's a little it's not exact. It's almost like if you took it and transposed it into like a more, and it was such an interesting choice to me, because there's a warmth to that song, you know, and it's such a dark I mean, now that I know the story behind it, I mean, even more so. But you do a lot of that though in your music. You have darkness and you have light at the same time, and I think that's one of the things that keeps it interesting. It keeps it from being one dimensional. And
That's the essence of noir. I mean, if you ever want to hate film, take a film class. And I did go to a film class, and what we did study at the time was noir. And one of the things that I got from it, which was kind of interesting, was the college I went to was a merger of two other universities, and part of it was a Jesuit training college. So I was taught film noir by a Jesuit who saw crucifixes and religious allegories everywhere.
Okay.
But the thing about noir for him was, and he's right, is that it's a very almost biblical story of the very damaged anti-hero who's just mired in just a crapsack world, just trying to make it, not necessarily amoral, not necessarily moral, just trying to Han Solo his way. Like, okay, he's a scumbag, but he's not a villain. But there's nobody with clean hands. Everybody there is just somehow tainted with it, but they're all still trying to get their own piece of the sun. And that seemed to be a perfect metaphor for just life. I mean, if you look at the Bible, I'm not meaning from a religious perspective, but I mean
as a text,
just from a storytelling, as a text. It's, I mean, never mind the second half, which is sort of like a story that gets told older. If you look at the other stories, there's so many damaged, broken people doing horrible things to each other and making so many obvious mistakes, and having these personal tragedies from it, and trying to find some way to transform that tragedy. And it's like I said, that's as old that story is, of just, I'm here and I'm trying to do better in my life. But man, if I could take back the stuff that I've done to hurt the people that I have, but could I really have done it any differently? You know what I mean? I mean, that's
well, and would you have the empathy and the self-awareness and the motivation to do that if you hadn't made those mistakes? I really, I mean, you started with this album, and it came out just a couple months before the pandemic started, and then you got walloped. I don't obviously want to, spend a lot of time on something that was so traumatic, but I mean, it's not like you just knew of a couple people that you lost. You had major losses. You lost your dad, right? Your grandma, and one of your really close friends.
Sure.
That has to change you at a DNA level. Like, I mean, to watch that happen. So, I mean, you knew then going into Ghosts that was going to be the story that you needed to tell, right? Okay.
Correct.
So, I mean, I don't want to gloss over, Call of the Void, because I mean, I really just enjoyed the whole thing, but I especially enjoyed Heroin Girl. I really did.
Yes.
I love, I mean, that's got such a swingy feel to it to me. And I'm probably going to misuse terms, but I can only describe it in my own vernacular, not knowing anything about jazz.
No.
But I love that though. And I love that, that melody is so lovely. It's just so gentle, and again, I love that you're using these warmer, and I keep using that word, and I mean it a little bit sonically, but I also just mean the mood, and I don't know that it's the mood that you set out to affect, but that's one of the beauty parts, right? Is that, you come and you Rorschach whatever you want to on something that you're listening to. And as long as it's making you feel something, I feel like it's mission accomplished, but I mean, and I almost felt like, and I've said this a million times on this show, that I only ever make comparisons when I think they're favorable, but that almost sounded to me in a very distant cousin kind of way, almost like a swing version of Walking on the Moon by the Police. It's got that.
Oh yeah, there's four notes in there that hit the same.
You know the chord that way, and
there's only 8 notes, and there's only so many ways to put them together. Yeah.
But I don't mean that it sounds like that song, because it doesn't. It's the thing I love about recognizing familiar faces in a new crowd is in that way musically, is that it gives it a sense of home, and it gives me a little bit of an anchor, but it's not like I'm going, oh, okay, so Jack just did the swing version of the play. Like, it's nothing like that. But I love all those little elements, and you've got the dialogue in there. Is that from, I mean, do you pull from movies? Or are you recording that?
Sure.
Okay.
Those If I pull anything, it's from public domain sources. I don't.
Okay, yeah.
I don't steal anything.
No, I
No.
didn't
The
think so.
Heroin Girl is an interesting song, and I may have mentioned this before. Forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but
No, you're good. You said something
when
about the hitman. That was all you said, though.
So
Yeah.
I'll just expand slightly on it. So when I moved to Montreal for college, wet behind the ears, I was a suburban Canadian kid, and the people that lived across from me were very broke and obviously had lived a very hard life.
Okay.
And about 3 weeks into being friends with them and hanging out with them and stuff, they're like, "Look, before the cops approach you, we both got a past, right? And
Okay.
he used to hurt people for money. He's deal drugs. I mean, the laundry list of things that he had done was,
Okay.
and he ended up telling me quite a few interesting stories about that kind of lifestyle and everything.
Bet. Yeah.
But he said something that absolutely fascinated me, and he said that he knew he was hooked on heroin, not from any physical effects that was affecting him, but when he heard a love song on the radio, and it was about heroin to him, he could not associate warm feelings or happiness or love or yeah, baby, I want to, and of course, I
Heroin
later
was his
on found out,
lover. Okay.
yeah, and I later on heard Lou Reed. I mean, much later, heard Lou Reed's "Perfect Day," where he's basically describing as if he's hanging out with a really good friend, right? But there was a part of me that promised him that somehow I would find some way to tell some part of his story, that image of just not. Because I know some people have heard the title Heroin Girl and assumed it was about a girl who gets hooked on heroin. But it really was about the inverse. It was about the guy saying, my life is so empty that instead of a human being to find compassion and warmth, it's this drug. And there's so many people
she's
now.
She's the girl. Yeah, she's the girl.
Yeah, that's the girl. Or my phone is the girl. I cannot deal with any human beings.
Right.
My computer's the girl. My video games is the
right.
We're finding other things now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, here's an interesting thought experiment for you. If you remember the comedian John Panette, right?
No, I don't think I know him.
Big man. He used to tell all kinds of jokes about getting out of the line and, I'm starving and everything was about food.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm getting an image in my head. Small head, pointy hair.
No, he was very, very chubby. He was very towards the end, he slimmed down a little, but he was always going about buffets. Oh, I love the buffet. Oh,
I think I do.
Okay. Buffet. Yeah, that guy. I tried to do it first. Yeah, now you heard the voice.
I got the voice actually helped. I know it's you kind of had that guy. Yeah, I know who you're. Yeah, I think I do. Okay, so
I think he ended up doing musical theater. But anyway, all of his routines were about how much he was addicted to food.
Actually, they have a buffet in Las Vegas. It's called the Oz Buffet. It's the Wizard of Oz theme, and it's a buffet. You walk up and it's the Emerald City and it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. I ran to it. You're out of the wood, you're out of the dark, you're out of the night. Step into the sun, step into the light.
And how much he enjoyed food and how, food was actually kind of interfering with his life a bit. And I'm like, you know what? If he had talked about any other kind of addiction that way, if he'd been like, you haven't been going down the street and you're just cleaning your fingernails with your works and going, don't do that, people would have looked at that and said, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
But if he's going on about, and I had the steak and the butter on the steak,
right, then it's funny
or whatever, then it's an acceptable. It's
addiction.
An acceptable escape. It's an acceptable addiction. It's an exceptional substitute. And I don't know anything about John Panette's life, and I'm not suggesting that he had a
but I understand what you're saying, though. Yeah, no, I understand what we're replacing love with, or what we're replacing connection with, or emotion with, or passion with. I understand.
Yeah, so I'm saying that, but that's why there is that warmth in that song. Sorry, going back to heroin. There's why there's that warmth in that song, and there's that I die for him.
That was one that stuck out for me. I mean, A Song for Amy is beautiful. It's just like you can feel all of the love in that song, and I didn't know your wife's name, but I was like, okay, I figure this is clearly somebody who's very important to him, and it's funny, that song is almost, please don't hate me, I mean this in a good way, almost Christmassy to me. There's something very First Noel, Let It Snow, like there's a brightness to it and a warmth to it and a sense of home to it that I kind of associate with that. And it was just so interesting to come from, your intro, is that a Moog?
Opposites attract, right?
Well, yeah, but is that a Moog in The Axeman Cometh? You have it. You have like a.
No, that
There's like a wobbly organ synth at the beginning of that, and I didn't know if it was an emulator or what you were.
oh yes, yes. No, that's a bass drone. I have a huge collection of them because
Oh,
again,
okay.
see, one of the things that I used to do in the 70s was as I said, I watched a lot of Doctor Who, and they produced an album of their sound effects. And they had all of these sort of ambient soundscapes that they used just incidentally as background.
Yeah,
Some of
yeah.
the stuff. But they were these like really gorgeous soundscapes. And I would listen to that for hours, being like this weird
I'm going to
like
tell you right now. I'm
neurodivergent
going to
kid.
ask Greg later, and he's going to be like, "I love that album," or things like. So I totally get it.
Sure.
What lights up the neurodivergent brain is all kinds of cool. So yeah, I hear you. But yeah,
So when I heard that, I mean, it's like that's why all my stuff is kind of soundscapey, and there's like elements like that, and it's because
Yeah.
I spent like hours of my life just being lost in these amazing soundscapes that these people produced.
But that I think, there are memes about it that, people joke around if you replace, I mean, I've even posted stuff like that. If you replace, that when Voldemort is finally, I don't remember this,
Right.
whatever, but like finally reconfigured and he's got his nose back or whatever the hell happens. I don't know. I'm not a Harry
Sure.
Potter fan, but like, they replace, the music with, True by Spandau Ballet, and it completely changes the
Okay.
yeah, and but people don't realize how much even incidental music, even incidental ambient sound, how much it affects your emotional response to art. They really don't. I mean, even if you were paying attention, even if you're a musician, that you can. I've seen, and I love stuff like that. I'll geek out on. I'll go down the rabbit hole on trailers where they recut with
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
and it'll be like, oh, it's this, the Notebook or whatever. I never saw it, but apparently it's like this huge chick flick romantic movie, but they cut it with music that's like, almost like Philip Glass creepy horror movie piano, and it's like, he will always be there, he's always watching you, and all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, and it is the magic and the alchemy of music. So it makes so much sense to me that being baked into your DNA from just having grown up around it and kind of, stemmed on it or whatever in the 70s, that's what you focused on, you listened to, that you're going to pull from all of that. Because it sounds to me like, when you tell me you start in songwriting and making music in general with a mood, you're telling me there is I won't even, reduce it to one emotion, but there is at least a complex of emotions that you are trying to evoke in someone. And that right away gets me interested, because then, it makes me interested in the music because it's making me feel something. It makes me interested in you and why that mood, and then again, how to reverse engineer a mood, and I think that's one of the most fascinating things about music to me. And I think we all do it. So not, primary process where we're it's just automatic, but we don't think about it so specifically or so overtly that we really are trying to create emotion in people. And you have to know what recipe of sounds can result in that emotional dish, and it's kind of fucking awesome, but we don't really go into that too much. So what were you going to say to that?
Well,
or
a couple
relative
of things, but I think I'm going to plug somebody else. So another major influence on me growing up was a guy by the name of Genesis P.R.H., who was if you learn more about this particular individual, and I want to make sure I get the pronouns right, because this person's pronouns was literally her/her/e. So she is here, but
okay.
And was a big proponent of the cut up method of doing things, and trying to do it in a sort of occult or magical way. And wrote some really interesting music, wrote industrial music, and then everybody started doing industrial music, and then got involved with acid house, and then everybody started getting involved in acid house, and then decided, what is the last transgressive thing that you can do? Mess with gender, and decided to become a pandrogyne, and now everybody is asking these questions about gender. So Genesis was always doing something about 5 years before it happened.
I was going to say, on the forefront,
The other thing that they did, I don't know what Genesis pronouns were.
I think they is a good safe. Yeah.
I'm apologizing to the family. But anyway, where I'm going with this was, I was interested in Genesis's music where they would use cut-ups of clips of people talking, and usually from really neat places like Jim Jones giving a speech, and he has a laugh that's truly scary. If you've ever heard Jim Jones
it's
laughing,
maniacal.
it
Yeah,
is creepy.
yeah.
But in addition to
Oh, yeah.
that, Genesis actually had this interesting series of lectures, and they were passed around on tapes like samizdat, from the Soviet years. And Jen basically said to try to figure out what you wanted to do with your life and work backwards from where you wanted to end up.
There you go again.
And
Reverse
so, if you,
engineering. Yeah.
well, yeah, that's where I got a lot of ideas from. Like, if you
Yeah.
don't like where you live, if you're tired of living in a government town, figure out what you have to do to get citizenship in another country.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Learn a trade that's in demand enough that they'll give you a visa and then
Let you
get
travel.
sponsored. And
Yeah.
you see what I'm saying? Like, you
I
work,
do. Yeah.
if you want to make a band, don't sit around smoking a joint going, oh, wouldn't it be great, if we had this band? Take an extra job washing dishes. Don't spend any of that money. Don't go down the bar. Just sit there and gather that money together until you have enough to buy.
Yeah.
And he would actually teach people, like, you set up your own life the way you want to, and you decide what your success looks like. And that's not going to look the same for me. And I really wish I'd had the chance to meet Jen and say, look, this is what I look like, and this is what I do.
Yeah.
I am not a pandragine. I don't do industrial music. I wear suits and I have a corporate job, but by God, I've followed your ideas about doing what you will, doing what you want, the letter, and reverse engineering that, right?
Yeah.
So the whole business of some sonic ideas of gluing things together and finding different sources and doing that, but also the reverse engineering, as you said, as well as the sound stuff. Yeah, I'm gonna cite my references anywhere I can find them.
Yeah.
Anybody who's interested in learning some really interesting things, Genesis PRH of Psychic TV and Throbbing Gristle, and
I feel like the reason I know of the name is I think you did a lengthy post on them at some point on Facebook. Okay, yeah, it was ringing a bell, the name, and I was just putting it together and just fascinating. I mean, your social media is very interesting. I guess we use it as a singular, whatever.
Sure.
But what you put on social media is very interesting because it's not banal. You have things you want to get across. And
sure.
I even love watching you were going through your flyer for your gallery show and what that was going to look like and how you were going to get that out to people and it was refreshing to watch someone broadcast the things that a lot of us have had the experience of, but that's all meant to be the behind the scenes part. Most people will just go, oh, hey, here are the photos from my show and it went great. Right. But not, here's all the fucking work I had to figure this out and to market it and to get people there and whatever. And so, but not to get off the track, but I remember seeing that post and just thinking, wow, okay, this is, because I've started to get interested in who interests you because you interest me. So it's a little bit of the transitive property of being interesting, but I think that this idea, and it's really in order to do what you're saying and what Jen was talking about, it requires a level of vision and a level of self-awareness and a level of emotional honesty and the willingness to be both optimistic and realistic simultaneously, where you are it's not an easy thing. I think it might be for you not easy but easier maybe than for some other people to work backwards, because what the goal is, what the end game is, what that mouthpiece needs to, or might not know what the mouthpiece needs to be, but you know how it needs to help you sound, and what mood you want to get. So how do you get there? And I think
you also have to be open to happy accident. When something works out that you didn't expect, roll with that. That's important too. Sorry.
Yes.
Carry on.
No, but you're exactly right. Cause it's funny. When I used to consult, I would see a lot of times, it's long story. It was with, people who were teaching autistic kids, and, they would be asking a question and the teacher would have an answer in mind, so they would say something like, oh, what's a red fruit? And, they're thinking apple, and the kid goes strawberry, and they're like, nope, it's apple. And I'm like, nope, it's also strawberry. It's not that
tomato.
Answer. Tomato. Yeah, is it fruit? Right, exactly. Yeah. But I mean, and that's the thing. It's the idea that, you might not get the answer you were looking for, but you might get the answer that you need, or something that makes you ask a different question that gets you to a different version of your answer. So I absolutely agree with that being open. But I think that most people tend to climb one stair at a time. And you seem to be looking at the whole staircase, and sort of thinking how to get your way back to the bottom so that you know the best way to climb it. And I don't think that is necessarily a skill set that everyone possesses. I think, and I do think some of that is the Greg, not to be not self, but like family referential. Greg is somebody who thinks that way. I will sit there and go, hey, you know what? We should have a band where we can, just be online. Since it's the pandemic and we can't go anywhere. Okay, bye. And like, I'm out. That's it. That's my contribution, is like, this magical thing should happen. And I'm like, time to go, and then Greg will sit there and go, okay, so if we want to have that, then we need, and he can do that and you can do that. And I do think some of that is neurodivergent magic, but I also think it's just a particular way of seeing the world. So I find it fascinating. And now I'm looking forward to going and listening to you again for the third or fourth time, whatever it is, everything with this conversation in my head, of just like, okay, what do I think the mood was? What do I think, how do I think he got there? What are the elements that are in service of that mood? Not because I want to think about your music more than listen to or enjoy it, but because that will give me color and depth and nuance and texture that, I felt, but I didn't understand, if that makes any sense at all. Just again, quickly to go through another one, Baby Baby. You mentioned that earlier. So that was a disco song to start?
Yep.
Okay. And then you end up
flat out 4 on the floor disco.
Yeah. But I mean, it is so funny because it has that kind of, what is that? Pardon me. It's bastardized jazz, I'm sure at best, if it even is, but
it's
Billy
fine.
Joel had that, Big Man on Mulberry Street. Do you know that song?
I actually have never heard it. Sorry.
Okay. I don't know that you're missing a lot, but it's I was a moonlighting geek and it was in an episode, and that's the only reason I know that song. but it has that sort of, it's that very almost romantic, jazzy, warm, kind of vibrant feel to it, and then it morphs a little bit into what I almost think of as subway jazz. Mm-hmm. And I say that only from having ridden on the subway here in the city, enough times. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where there's just all of this extemporaneous, really generally so far better than it should be, just to be playing on the subway where nobody's fucking paying attention except maybe to yell at the person to shut the hell up, but like it's interesting,
Context is key. I mean, Yo-Yo Ma very famously played
in the
outside. So I mean, you know
unlike,
what I mean?
Wasn't it like the most? It was like this incredibly, insanely expensive violin too. It was like
right. Yeah, he was playing a cello, and it was like nobody cared.
Right,
and then he played exactly the same thing inside where people had paid $1,500 to get in, and they were like throwing flowers at the stage.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So to blow your mind, the melody line from that Baby Baby song was originally in my head and written and originally performed by me just to proof the concept of the song and get it worked out as being sung like Rod Stewart did. Do you think I'm sexy?
No,
so go back.
Do you have that anywhere? Because I need to. I would never play it for anybody. Okay, I was gonna say I gotta hear that.
No,
okay.
I junked it, but I'm saying the next time you hear that saxophone
I'll go back
line,
and listen for that. Okay.
Imagine Rod Stewart singing that in the same sort of way that he sang.
Okay.
Do you think I'm sexy?
If you are my body, he has that very kind of There we go.
Sort of thing.
Yeah,
that was it.
And that's jazzy in its way. It's not scat exactly, but he has a little bit of bite to it. Yeah. So okay, all right. So disco, would not have known that. And the next one too, Little Miss Vietnam. Really.
Oh yeah, that's very personal.
Okay. I want to hear that because that reminded me somehow. Don't really know how, of one of my favorite songs of all time, Renee and Georgette Magritte by Paul Simon.
Okay.
Yeah, it just
there's
really.
Sorry.
Oh no,
I haven't. I'm sorry.
You need that one. That of every that it's just it's so gorgeous, and it's got this intimate, just this heart-rending feel to it, and it's just that's what I felt from that, and so talk to me about what as much as you want to share how that song is especially personal for you.
Sure. Okay, so again, I was in the capital city of Canada. I'm Gen X, and we had a lot of folks come to us from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia.
Mm.
So in infancy, I spoke a certain degree, very little, but enough Vietnamese, right?
Mm.
And picked up some of it later on in life as well. I ended up in high school with some Vietnamese kids, and ended up dating a Vietnamese girl throughout my 20s. And I ended up hearing a lot of stories firsthand of what it was like to escape that war, and some of the just miraculous circumstances that led them to survive it, and going from being well-off landowners to basically working minimum wage jobs to try to survive and raise 4 kids in a one-room apartment, right? And the one thing that struck me was, and it's the struggle that is particularly borne by girls, and it's every time you have anybody move from one, and I just came across the whole concept from watching the Vietnamese community. But in essence, every time you get a group of people move from one country to another, one culture to another, and the more pronounced the difference is, the more you get it, is the expectation on girls to conform to 2 sets of conflicting, right? So I can't imagine somebody coming from like war-torn Afghanistan, and all their friends are like, "Oh, you're not dating anyone," and the family going. Of course, I say this at risk of sounding like I'm stereotyping, but the kinds of things.
No,
that
I
it's
think
like,
it's clear that you're not right. Yeah, there
Right,
are certain cultural norms that are not, stereotypical to mention. So yeah, absolutely.
And this is the success path that we think you should follow. Well, I want to forge my own path.
Right.
And then you end up ostracized from both in some instances. I mean,
Right.
the number of times I've read from, and it was, I just dating columns, and there was this one girl, I think she was from India, and she was going on about how she, I'll get back to the song in a second, but how
you're there. I got you.
She dated, and she was going out there and she's trying to live and straddle both cultures. And then when she was rejected enough times by the greater culture, she tried to go back to her own. And it's like, no, you're over 25.
Yeah,
we've already married. No, not tainted, but just like everyone's married, like.
Oh, I see. Too late.
Yeah,
too late.
Too late, right? If you'd been a bit more traditional, you might have made it. But and this, just unpacking that box, I don't have the skill to do that, but I at least recognize that conflictedness.
Yes.
And the one image, and I really hope she doesn't mind me saying this, but my then girlfriend at the time said her earliest memory was being excited of jumping off a plane onto that slide that you used to evacuate people from, and they had so many people on those planes. They were the only way to get them off was to. And she was a little girl. She was like, and that was her first memory, was the joy of jumping onto this. But she was being evacuated from a refugee war zone with a half-dead sister, right? And you know what I'm saying? Like, if you were to step back and look at that situation, right? It's like, what with an uncertain future, not speaking the language, not knowing what was next, and having lost everything.
Literally jumping out of a plane in that way, and then figuratively jumping out of one too. Yeah. Yeah.
But her memory of it was just, oh, wow, this is, I get to jump down a really big slide. And that image, and just, it's haunted me. I mean, there's been other stories I've heard, and other things that have haunted me since, not just from her, but from other people as well. But I really, and of course, later on, I started riding motorcycles and hearing about the Vietnam War from the sides of not the South Vietnamese commandos, but the Americans that went there as well. So it's really shaped a lot of my life. And I just wanted to kind of say, sort of thanks to that community and a recognition that, they were my friends, and, they meant something. So that's what that meant.
No, it's just, there's a dynamic build in that one that's, I think, especially noticeable, or at least it was to me, from where you begin. And again, the beginning, very dark, very ominous. You've got the helicopter sounds, so you've definitely got the ambiance in there. And that you actually, that's the one you use, the Oriental riff. That's the term. Yeah, right? No, I know what you mean. So I mean, and I've always found that interesting too, because. But
you'll notice that immediately afterwards, I sarcastically rephrased it to mock it.
Yes.
I did. Yes, that was a deliberate choice, but that wasn't to.
It was not. No, it wasn't. It wasn't done in a stereotypical way. It wasn't done in it, and it that alone, just the use of that for and the way that you rephrased it, literally, is so interesting to me. That that just the way that those parallel open forts make us think this is Asian music, and
Right.
and and to convey all of that in these little musical glances that you have. The percussion in that gets, very insistent, and the piano gets very insistent, and there's just all of this build, and it was a song that I sat with for a while. I mean, I listened to all of them, multiple times, but there's some I go back for more, because then when I'm done working, I can just sit there and go, okay, so what was I feeling there, and that was one that like Heroin Girl, like Baby, that, and it's so funny in such different ways. Like you said, it's, I forget exactly how you put it, but basically, the variety is the spice of life kind of idea of just, have a mix of things, and you do that again on Ghosts too, which is interesting to me because that has more of a concept. It sounds like, obviously, just talking about the losses you have been through and suffered and
others. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you start that album in a very specific way, right? Okay. You've got the Marche Funèbre, and, that's Chopin, right? That's, yeah. So, but you're Chopin, right? So,
Well, pulling a leitmotif from a song and writing another song around it is a jazz thing to do. So,
yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, and it's funny because it almost seemed, and I mean this in the greatest way, it was almost like Chopin meets the Peanuts. It was almost like that Vince Guaraldi feel. But again, that piano's real dark, and the sax is so swingy, and I'm coming into it and going, okay, this is not going to be a simplistic gloss on anything, and then
it jumps into the second part, and you hear that contralto come in underneath. That's
but I love when the meta, the macro and the micro of the music all has the same idea. That grief is not simplistic. Grief is not linear. It's not even binary. It's this cacophony of all of these different emotions and just other people's feelings and how they push into the circle, how you push out, and the album is complex, and not that anything that you do is not complex in its way. That's, I think, and again, I think of that as a good thing. It's interesting, it's intricate, it's got layers to it, it's got, there's investigating that you can do, there are things that you can pull, but I really Ghost is just, it's such a, I don't want to use the phrase tour de force. It's so awful, but emotionally, that was kind of how it felt to me. I hate the phrase, but because it just, it put me in places in my own life that felt like what I imagined some of what your mood goals were for the LP. And I always admire, and I'm always in awe when musicians can do that, because it's not something that everyone that makes music builds into their music. It's not something that all music evokes or evinces in someone, and I really,
not all music is meant to.
No, like exactly. But I mean more when it is intended to, and then it falls short of that, yeah. Gotcha. Sometimes you just want to go to the club and whoop, whoop, whatever. And like, that's right. But that's a feeling too. Right. So, but it, I just, it's, and like Dead Man's Riff, right? So you've got the way that you begin with the gong and then you end with almost sort of these church bell kinds of and it's just all of these little movements.
A funeral church bell.
Yeah, and it's just these shifts. Yeah, and if you've heard that sound, you know what you're hearing. It's like, okay, that's not the wedding bell. That's the other bell.
My father played that riff around the house. He at the end of his life, he decided he never had any hobbies, so he decided to pick up the trumpet, and every time he picked it up, he would go da 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 da. That's every single time he picked it up. That's the Dead Man's Riff. Yes. And when he died, he left me his trumpet, which is being played on that track. That's his trumpet. Wow. Playing his signature riff.
Oh, wow. See, again, but that, I didn't know any of that. But that song got me. You know, it's such a simplistic way to say, but it did. You know, I've said it about people like Joel from Steam Slicer, you know, and Soleil Noir, and you know, just walking away from things where, and now Nexus Effect too, with embracing discomfort, you know, where I can't explain why I'm feeling what I'm feeling from what I'm hearing, because I don't have the data that I would need to reference from. But it was one of those where I was like, I came back to that one a lot, you know, and
I'm
now
almost worried about giving this away, and so that now people will listen to it and they'll not do their own finding of their own, you know what I mean? They won't find their own response to it.
you know, I don't think you can control for that in either direction.
Right.
I don't think you could have made one have a reaction, and I don't think that knowing what it is, because it you know, that was indelible for me. You know, I had my reaction, and I had it every time I heard it, you know, and it was different shades of it, but it was there. I don't think that's going to change now. Like, I'm not going to be like, oh, okay, so now I have to react to that. I don't think so. I think because it's not so much the words in the language, it's the prosody, you know, it's the cadence,
Right.
it's all, you know,
No,
and
for sure.
that's what you take away from it. But I just, you know, and then I don't know if I'm saying, if it's Cali or Kali Bop, like where did that one come from? Because that's a complete shift. Like that is like a, you know, that's one of those, and now for something completely different. So, you know, I know we skipped over Lonely Death in Alabama, but we did talk about it.
No. Well, we took off. Okay, so Kali, we according to Hindu mythology, we live in the age called Kali Yuga, which is the time of the demon Kali, not the goddess Kali, but the demon Kali, right?
Okay.
A time of, and a band actually that's coming here soon, the Cro-Mags, they converted to Hare Krishna, and they titled an album "The Age of Kali." So they're the idea that we're in a time of human history that's mediated by, you know, wars and death and pollution and all sorts of things. It was just kind of a recognition that we're my inspiration for writing it was just simply, we're dancing in an age of according to their cosmology, literally being run by a demon before we go to a different cycle. Like we're in Kali Yuga right now, or at least we were when I learned about it. So so I basically put a series of sound ideas together for that, and that's where that one came from.
Okay, yeah, it's interesting because there's more dissonance in that one than I tend to hear in most of your other pieces. You will use it, you know, surgically in other things, but this was definitely more of, there was just, you know, I mean, that sort of very bombastic, I think, clarinet, you know, and just all of, you know, the organ and or electric piano maybe, but you know, all of those pieces together, that is a song that I did not come away with a particular feeling about, or from, really, I guess, more than about, but I was so curious, you know, because in relief against and that's, I'm not saying anything negative, I'm just saying, you know, relative to what the other ones brought up for me, you know, in relief against, you know, A Lonely Death, and then Winona, however you say it, like Winona, you know, just so different, you know, and but I appreciate it because it was, in a way, it was almost kind of an oral sorbet a little bit, you know, it kind of, because Lonely Death is pretty intense for, now we know, obvious reasons. And so, you know, to have something that was in a completely different emotional tenor was helpful, even. But so, and I mean, again, like, guys, we can't go through the whole of everything, but like these are albums you're going to want to listen to as albums, you know. It's not that they're not listenable individually, but I think you lose, it's like reading one chapter out of a book, or one tome in a series. You know, you will miss a lot of the story that Jack is telling on these albums, you know, and it's just worth it. You know, it's worth it too, because it, you know, I was struck by how different you could make me feel, and how different you could make what you were making sound with just slight changes in the way you were breathing into something, or the way that the way that you arrange the percussion, or the tempo or the time, so whatever, that it's I kind of think of jazz in that way a little bit, like that game Operation, where you kind of have to not touch the sides, and I feel like I'm just surprised that I now have jazz albums that I want to go back and listen to again, because
Yes.
but that's
why I do this.
that's what I was going to say. When you say you
That
make
too,
music for people who don't like jazz, you've done that. And I'm sure there are people who do like jazz that also really like what you do. And I'm sure there are the people that turn their nose up or whatever, but that's true of every genre and every musician.
Of course.
But I appreciated that. I really appreciated that. I love when people can teach me that I'm wrong about things that I think that I know, but I'm actually wrong.
Or at least ask you to look at it a second time, right? I mean,
sure,
that's all
but I mean, it's it was almost a tenet, a Martin nailed to the door tenet for me, that I don't like jazz,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So I mean, I was wrong, I was wrong. I hadn't met the right jazz yet, and again, like it's like with country with me. I have this dislike-hate relationship with country, but it's a stupid thing to say because I love Dolly Parton, who again I still think is her own genre, and I love certain pieces of different things. So it's
Todd Paisley is one hell of a raconteur.
I mean, I don't know anything about, or there's a Luke Bryant I keep hearing about. He sounds like he would be country, but I don't know, but so, I mean, it's ignorant to shut myself off from entire genres. It's just stupid. I love Patsy Cline and Crazy, and you could call that a country song or whatever. So I think, it's, you forced me to be open-minded about something that I thought I was closed-minded about. So I thank you for that, because now I know better, and I can be more open when I go in there. Listen.
The other major thing I've tried to recontextualize is suit wearing, which people have associated with courtrooms and marriages and job interviews. And I mean, if you look at any beatnik back in the day, Burroughs or Ginsberg, or any noir movie like that, these gangsters dressed to the nines. I mean, people used to wear suits to, I mean, Mike Hammer, the Mickey Spillane novels, Dashiell Hammett, they were with fedoras. It's like a lot of these guys that dressed like this were straight up not the kind of people that didn't have any kind of edge. Right. And again, one of the stories that I like to tell is when I was barbering, because I really wanted to learn this enough. I actually went. I know. I love
that you actually got licensed as a barber because you're trying to bring grooming back. I think that's great.
Right. Anyway, this one kid comes in and he's like, like hesitant to get his hair cut because, having that, shoulder length hair and, being that sort of,
that's his
Grateful
thing.
Dead look, that was his thing now, right? But now I got to get so look, I was like, look, just trust me on this, right? And I gave the guy a haircut, and it wasn't some sort of weird hipster thing with a huge quiff in the front or whatever. It was classic. It was a sort of thing that you could take a photo of the guy, and 20, 30, 40 years down the line, you could look back at that and not be embarrassed by the hairstyle that was in it. But it made him look great. It made him look 30 pounds lighter. It suited his face. And he came back to me and told me that the girl that he was interested in actually reached out to them and they'd started dating as a result of that. So he came back for more haircuts because he didn't realize that would make that much a difference to his life. Again, one of the main things. So I recently was, as I said, that show that you were at, and it was mostly shoegaze punks at the thing. They couldn't figure out where to program this. And I show up on stage. I'm twice the age of everybody else there. I have the screen. You see all of this, phantasmagoric stuff going on behind me, old police procedurals, old stripper movies, of course, which have been censored and blurred, right? From like 1940. No, but like really seedy type stuff, and me playing the other instruments and stuff, and me playing, and then I get off stage, and it went from like, what the hell is this to what the hell is this? And the thing that made me happiest was about 3 weeks later, I saw a picture of one of the people that had been at that concert, and he was wearing a jacket and a collared shirt. And he had decided to up his game wearing something. And I'm like, if I've just rubbed off on one person that way, right, to think about it other than just something really square, I think I've done my job there too. Well, sorry, I interrupted.
No, but it's all of a piece, right? So I mean, and I think I read you said somewhere at some point something like, in the day, back in the day, if you wanted to stand out, you had to dress like a punk, or you had to dress like this, that. Now,
Right.
if you want to stand out, you have to dress in a suit with a fedora, and kind of be more, polished or whatever. And I think that it's part of the aesthetic, right? I mean, you're gonna get up and play jazz, and you're gonna be what in like the standard cover band dad Home Depot gear. Like, it's not gonna fly. You have to. There's an image, and there was a,
Thelonious Monk.
yeah, I mean, there was a
Yep.
cool about that, that, the guy, the ring-a-ding kid, and you come out and like, how many people have seen that picture of Sinatra, where he's got the, the tie down to here and the jacket slung over, and he just looks
Sure.
so fucking cool. I mean, so I appreciate that. I appreciate that you're all
I
in.
can't.
You're
Yeah,
all
I
in.
can't carry off. I would love to go to Italy, and there's a doom jazz label out there that wants to carry one or two of my songs, and they're in Rome, so
Oh,
I might
wow.
run into them at some point. But I can't carry off that sort of insouciant, sort of like Marcello Mastroianni in La Dolce
Yeah.
Vita, where she's got the
Yeah.
cigarette and the Ray-Bans, and just that sprezzatura of being
Yeah.
ever so effortlessly just, or the
Cool
if you've
and
seen
sexy.
Hannibal,
And, yeah.
the movie Hannibal, where he's they're chasing Hannibal in Italy, and it's in Florence, so it's
Yeah,
gorgeous. and it's
that's
all
the
that
one
art
with
everywhere.
at the end the
Right, yeah.
meal. Yeah, okay, yeah, I
But
got
if
you.
you remember, the police sergeant, the carabinieri that's chasing him, is ever so slightly disheveled, but he's got the suit, but it's just ever so slightly casual enough to be able to pull off that whole casual elegance that the
Rakish
Italians
kind
can
of.
do.
Yeah.
I can't do that. I got to be put together, and it all has to fit, as you say, right? I mean, yes, have gone to punk shows dressed like this, but it works better if you have like a Gibson in your hand and there's kind of blue playing on the record player. So it's like, if I'm asking people to dress a certain way, let me give them some mood music to set to that.
Right.
I'll never be the kind of guy that'll play the equivalent of Jackie Gleason's Music for Lovers. Right? I'm not a lover by definition. I'm a dark human being. I've always been drawn to darkness.
Mhm.
I joke that my stuff is Dave Brubeck goes through a goth phase, but like there's that mood. So, if there's rain coming down outside and you just need to pause and just
Mhm.
and just light that cigarette and have those 2 fingers of scotch and just look out the window. You need something on the record player that will kind of
Well,
match that mood, and that's what I'm trying to do.
No, and that's it. And I think that, people who can't get comfortable in uncomfortable spaces miss out on a lot. You either
Right.
try to outrun your grief or your depression or your anxiety or your whatever it is that's chasing you, whatever black inky thing is creeping from the depths, or you just, move along, and you
Right.
never register any of it. And I think that there's a lot of beauty, there's a lot of art. There's a reason that a lot of artists of all kinds, had mental illness and depression and were neurodivergent. There's a lot to that. You can't always be in the sunlight, so I think really, Jack, as we wrap up, which I'm really reluctant to do, but
I'm so
also
sorry.
my-
I'm
no,
taking too much of your time here.
no, this is not even our longest episode, so don't even worry
Okay.
about. No, look, I mean, this show is a conversation, right? And even if nobody watched it, with which people obviously are and will, but I would be fine with it, because I spending an evening with you has been fascinating for me, and I really enjoy you and the way that you see things, and this very again, genuine, but more even than genuine, just the utter lack of artifice, the utter lack of, being a poser in any way, or being, opportunistic in any way, or any of that. You're almost your whole personality and your whole approach to life is retro in that way, and again, I mean that in the best way. You really are, your art that's consistent to itself, like you don't have an attitude that doesn't fit with what you look like or what you do or the music that you make. And I enjoy that. I find all of that really fascinating. But I think that people are going to want to go and listen, guys, seriously, even if you think you don't like jazz, you will like this. And if you don't, that's fine, as Jack says, but
Yeah,
I
sure.
really think you will, because I wouldn't, like, and I do. So I think, and one of the really cool things about watching this community discover its own members is I remember you, I think you went on that hot challenge thing for Yellow for Yanni
Oh, yes.
yeah.
Yes.
And I think that in some ways was your first, or really the larger community's introduction to you. And I remember people messaging me, because I'm, I work with not,
Right.
official, like I help Yellow for Yanni or whatever. I try to amplify them, writing to me going, this fucking guy's cool, and like metal artists and like people who just, you would not think would have you on their playlist or whatever. They were just like, damn, this is really good. And I loved that, in the same way that I love watching like a Freaky Things get into a death pigeon. That sounded wrong,
Right.
but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
I love that. I love that. And I love that people are open enough to be able to say, hell yeah, I'm talk to me more about the guy with the suit and the fedora and the saxophone and all that. So I so enjoy that you're part of this community. There is nobody like
Thank
you
you.
in it. Yeah, and I really
love the community too. You've built something really great, and you should.
I
really
didn't build it. I literally I
plural.
always say this. I just collected a bunch of people who were already doing the cool thing in one place so they could do it bigger. But no, but this community, it generates itself, and I really and I love that you're in it, and I love that you're in it, and you're in it alongside, like all these other bands that have nothing to do with what you do, and it's all everybody's good. Everybody's good. Everybody listens. Everybody enjoys it. Everybody supports, and I adore that. But I'm so glad that I got to talk to you. But I'm not letting you go quite yet. Oh yeah, go ahead.
One more reference before that.
Absolutely, go for it.
So two of the people that have influenced me greatly, and I think if you want to live that kind of life, then you should read these people. The first is Genesis PRH, who I've already mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
The second is a man by the name of Quentin Crisp, who is a very flamboyant gay man. Yes, he wrote a series of books, but he became very famous for being himself. The first one was called The Naked Civil Servant.
Okay.
And the second one was called How to Become a Virgin. And he wrote a series of books after that. But basically, he found out he was a flamboyantly gay man in the 1920s and 30s when that was absolutely criminal. And he found he couldn't be anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And he just developed a lifestyle. And he was always honest and true to himself, even when it was uncomfortable. First from like in the 20s when people were angry about him. And then the gay community turned on him in the 80s when he spoke something he historically had a longer historical vision, but it landed wrong with the people he said it to, right?
Okay.
But he always, his main job, I mean, he'd been in movies with Sting. Sting wrote a song about him called An Englishman in New York.
Yes, that is why I know. Okay, that's why I know him. Yeah.
But he had his name, even though he's a celebrity, in the phone book. And if you wanted to, you could call him. And if you invited him to lunch or dinner and paid for the meal, he would talk to you for 2.5 hours and just kind of do what I'm trying to do right now, which is be interesting and make you think and expose you to different things and just be genuinely himself. And that's kind of why I've tried to carry that on, is because Quentin Crisp is no longer with us and Genesis PRH is no longer with us. Yeah. But the biggest, most important thing is you got to figure out who you are, and you got to be interesting, and you got to do interesting things and find somebody else is interesting and appreciate they're interesting for what it is. Everyone's interesting if you take enough time to learn about them. Sorry, I'll give you back your I really never apologize for sharing your thoughts. Really, I think that actually beautifully sums up. I always like to frame at the before we get to the last segment. Just kind of to coalesce everything a little bit more. But that kind of does it actually, because you are, and I started out, I think, this interview by saying authentically yourself. And I think that, some people can only be who they are, and that is a cross to bear because they don't like who they are. They don't feel comfortable in who they are. They don't feel that who they are is palatable to everyone else, and they want to belong or fit in or acclimate at least to things. And I think that there is something renegade in being yourself and just inhabiting your own skin in a way that doesn't have an agenda. I think people tend to, even some people in the most well-meaning way, the agenda might be to be liked or to be popular, and which are two different things, and to be, successful or to be this or to be that, and that gets
pulled into part of their personality, or it can change it, or it can obfuscate it, or some combination therein. But to have somebody where you just sit with them and you talk to them and you are talking to them, like really who they are, nothing, there's no kind of conversation and no sort of person that I would rather engage in or with than that. Because even if the person is completely different from me, if they are themselves and they're honest and they're authentic and they're just, they are who they are and it's WYSIWYG, I love that. I feel comfortable with that. I feel safe with that. I'm interested in that automatically. And to me, that's doing an interesting thing. Even if you don't do all the interesting things that you do, I love your little like, oh, and then I started riding motorcycles, and oh, and then so like I'm sure I got the tip of the tip of the tip of the very end of the tip of the iceberg with you in terms of all the stories you could tell. But that's interesting.
In the end, that's all you are.
Yeah.
That's all anyone is. All anyone is the story they write.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, part of that journey has to be, you have to hurt some people until you realize you have to limit. Not everybody's. Snoop Dogg said something to the effect of, and he kind of said it negatively, where it's kind of like, if somebody's not riding with you, let them go, right? Like if they're not pulling the same direction you are, cut them out of your life. I'm going to phrase that a bit differently. You can hurt some people if they need something else, or you aren't what they're, if they're going in a direction, you're keeping them from going in that direction.
Right.
Not let them go in the sense of, hey, you know what, you're fired, but more in the sense of, hey, this doesn't work and this is hurting you. I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
Right. And that was the hardest lesson for me to learn, because if you have to try to be, and that's the only thing we can eventually be, if to be yourself, you're not going to be palatable to everybody. And that might be a relative, that might be a partner that you, for whatever reason, met. And, heck, that could end up being one of your kids. Your kids could end up being somebody that you don't look at and recognize. And I've seen that with other people where their kids are not just nothing like them, but just, I'm almost sorry, but
antithetical to them. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to let you be you. I'm sorry. I have to literally let you go for you to fly. And that can be the most hardest and heart-wrenching thing to see. But yeah, it's a very hard journey to take, but ultimately it's the only one you can take.
That's it. Because everything else is just, it's not real. It's not real. And it won't get you where you need to go. But
well, it was more eliminatory that it can hurt other people. Also, less so, but other people. When you realize it's hurting other people to not be sincere, it's, and again, most insincerity is not deliberate. I mean, people go on about how, people are deceptive and everything else. The wool is pulled over their own eyes most of the time.
Right. And a lot of times I think it's defense mechanism too. No, I agree. We're going to have more conversations, but okay.
Sorry.
I gotta get to, I think, we end every show with a little segment that we like to call In the Vox Seat.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you the same 5 questions that I've asked everyone who's been on this show. And you may, I think, the controversy surrounding the final question, which we will get to.
Yes.
But yes, first question, and I'm curious about all of these, but this I'm very interested to see what you have to say. If you had to sum up your music in 5 words or less, what would you say?
Honest. Oh, in 5 words or less.
Yeah. Well, you can stick with that if you want, but you have 4 more if you'd like them.
Dark, moody, unusual.
Okay. A good 4. I like it. Okay. I like that. Okay. So your favorite thing about being a musician?
I have to borrow somebody else's answer. Somebody said, you can take a block of wood or a piece of reed and make it sing. You can actually make something live. And that to me is the biggest thing ever, that you can take something that otherwise has absolutely no life or vitality of its own and make it organic, especially if you're pairing it over something synthetic. Like if you have a synthesizer going and then you put like Annie Lennox's human voice, or you put a saxophone over it, it elevates it. And if you can do that, that's what keeps me going.
Okay, excellent. So flip side though, your least favorite thing about being a musician, if you have one?
I think the fact is that music isn't something people care about anymore. It used to be that music was tribal. You know, you were
Mm.
a punk, you were a goth, you were a rapper, that was part of your identity, and you
Yes.
collected the albums, and you went to see the bands, and there was a scene, and there was something that you could
Mhm.
belong to.
Mhm.
And now that's kind of been replaced by like TikTok memes
Yeah.
and in some cases it's actually kind of neat because you see people sort of thematically choosing what they want to listen to. So
Yes.
you'll have like, you know, a guy in a suit listening to metal because it's dark and it goes along with the goth he's listening to and it goes along with the punk he's listening to. And
Right.
it's more of a swath of color as opposed to one specific band.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think we've lost something that in as much as people don't follow musicians the way they did or go into this kind of in depth.
Yeah.
And I think with the amount of energy and time that people put into doing music, into learning all about it, you know, like learning scales, practicing, getting the sound,
Mhm.
putting things together, discarding things. Oh crap, that sounds like something I've heard before. And going, well, wait a minute. Okay, look, there's only 8 notes. I can't discard everything because something's going
Right.
to sound like something somewhere. Right?
Right. Right.
And second guessing it, when you finally put that out there, when you realize that to the vast majority of people now,
Yeah.
it's just like, oh well, you know, I'd rather. That's the only thing that's disheartening. But again, you
Mhm.
don't make music, and you never have made music if you're, you know, unless you're like a Maurice Starr or a New Kids on the Block or something where it's always a product, right? Then okay, yeah, go ahead and do it. But most people that make music do it because they have to, because it's something that's inside of them and they have something to
Mhm.
say.
Mhm.
And it's
Mhm.
really depressing when what they have to say is derivative of something else. Like I've always been the kind of guy that's appreciated the first people that come along, and
Yeah.
do something,
Yeah.
and nobody knows or remembers who they are, and it's the second bunch that comes in that gets the money. Okay, cool. Yeah. And in some cases, sometimes the second wave takes it further and does something like the Beastie Boys may not have been the first or whatever, but they've really done something with it, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I've really gone over time with that, the answer to
No,
that
no,
question.
no.
You get my point,
I
right?
don't have a stopwatch. No, but no, and I agree with you. I think that, it's, we get to the point where there's a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox and you lose something. And I think you're right that there was something about the times when people invested in musicians and in music that I don't see, and it now, things are more of like a mixtape of sorts, but you don't necessarily go, okay, well, I have to find the one song on this album that I love so much to represent the album to put it on the mixtape. It's just like, oh, I like this song and I like this song and I
Right.
like this. And look, I mean, it is as it is, and there's merit in that for the people who do it, I suppose. But I'm with you. There was something about that, that it was part of who you were. I think that's why people, especially people who grew up in the '80s and the '90s
Yep.
too, to a degree, like they have such a thing, we do with the music of just like, oh my god, it was so great, because it was more than music, and it was exactly what music is. So, okay,
Tell me
this,
honestly,
yeah, go
as a girl, you'd go through a guy's record collection to see what,
ahead.
and his book collection to see what he read, because
I I
that spoke volumes about who that
it
person was, right?
yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, the one thing that I always say is
Sorry.
that I feel like any relationship that I was ever in was worth it if I came away from it with music that I hadn't had when I went into it. So that was definitely important to me always. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like Holden Caulfield, going into the bathroom and seeing the secret slob, it's like, who are you really? Let me see your music
Yeah.
collection. So I'm with you. But
Right.
this, I'm really interested because I'm curious. Knowing you, it might not even be a jazz album, but this is a question people tend to hate. If you had to choose just one album to listen to for the rest of your life, what album would you choose and why?
Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd.
Okay, look at that. All right, this is a popular answer on the show. What is your why for that one? Besides the obvious.
Well, okay, it's brilliantly produced. It's got a whole host of different moods on it, but it's thematically cohesive.
Mhm.
It's got elements of blues. It's got those wonderful synthesizer pieces. It's got that gorgeous sort of blues singing, gospel singing in it as well.
Mhm.
There's choirs that come in. I mean, there's something in that record for everyone. And going back to the '70s, right? We lived in a house when I was a small child, which was attached to the next house by a communal wall.
Oh, sure. Okay.
And the guy next door was a part-time dope dealer. And so my parents would listen to Dark Side of the Moon every single night. And just as they put that on, most days, often than not, there would be pot smoke, at least the odor of it, coming through the communal wall into my bedroom. So I have memories of basically smelling burning marijuana and hearing just breathe, as I fell asleep. So I think if anything, that just the memories and the even without the amazing music that's on that album, just that moment in time, you'd be able to preserve that.
Mm-hmm. That's one, man, and it's funny. I mostly guys, for some reason, that I know that have special relationship with that album. And it's like The Wall, too. But
Right.
Okay, yeah, it's funny. I had a feeling you weren't going to go with jazz, and I'm not sure why, but I don't think I would have guessed Floyd. But great album, obviously. Okay, Jack, here we are. This is it.
If you listen hard enough, you could hear some Pink Floyd in my stuff.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I'm getting little flashes of things, but that I'm going to have to go back more. I'm going to have to do that investigation now too. I'm going to be listening to your stuff for I got to prep for the next show, dude. I'm going to have to find time. So the last question, you know what you're in for now. Here we go. I have to always do this, freaky. I know you like Jack. You don't want him to screw this up. I understand. Dom, if Dom is here, Dom is probably given up, but I'm going to have to ask this anyway.
Go on.
Jack, your toilet paper roll, when you put it on the holder, does it come from over the top or under the bottom, and why?
I hate to answer. I know this is going to sound like I'm punting on this question, but I almost never do that. I'm so damn lazy. I just typically take whatever's there and just put it on the small table, just like most guys will do. Just put it on any sort of horizontal surface, lying on its side, and it's usually stays there
on its side. Not roll end to end.
No.
How does it keep from?
Oh no. Sorry.
Okay.
If you're talking about front or back, it's on its side.
I got you. Okay. Yeah. Okay, that makes more sense. Like a paper towel holder. I got you.
Sure.
Okay, so you are an unapologetic other, and that is just a sheer lack of will to do anything more complicated, like putting it on the holder.
Basically.
Okay. Yep. So this is not a deeply held belief. This is just a lifestyle choice. Okay.
It's lazy.
I understand. All right. So there we go. That's another other. The other crowd is getting pretty big at this point. You have good company, I think, in the other crowd. It's bigger than the under crowd. Sorry, Dom. Okay, Jack, I really, I enjoyed talking to you so much. I really did. And I am, as I said, just so happy that you're part of this community, not just because of the excellent music that you make, but also just who you are and what you bring just by being who you are to the community and just to me tonight and everybody watching. And I dig you, man, to speak in the parlance, right? I do.
I dig you as well.
Thank you.
I have to say, there's only so much you can talk about your life, and you have to be sometimes careful about how much of it you ladle out at once. Otherwise, it becomes like a talk show thing where you go on every single talk show and say the same bit over and over again.
Right.
But you have built a really amazing community, and you're also a very engaged and a very present interviewer. And I hope someday that you will do me the favor of wherever you are. You said the city, so I'm presuming New York. If I get the chance to visit there, we turn the tables, and I, as a guest interviewer, interview you, because I'm sure nobody has heard your story, and you are absolutely fascinating to be spoke. It's actually pained me that I haven't been able to mine your brain for your response, and it's been one-sided. So I hope someday to get the opportunity to reverse that role and let the world hear more about this amazing person who's built this amazing podcast. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart,
so sweet.
And everyone else in the community.
Thank you so much. Well, it's hard to make me speechless, but it's not that hard to make me cry, which you are almost doing. But thank you for that. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate everybody that watched tonight. Go listen to Jack Fandom in the Exquisite Corpse Cabaret. Like him, follow him, subscribe. I know he will want me to say only if you want to. I am going to say do it anyway because we support. No, just support. You support. But you're going to want to anyway, trust me. If you haven't heard him yet, besides what we played tonight, you're missing out. So thank you again, Jack. Thank you guys for watching. That's another Vox and Guest in the Books. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Good night, everyone.